Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I once read that people in ancient times were advised to avoid the forests and wilderness. These areas were treacherous and often unexplored or unmarked. Those who entered them did not always return, and so myths began to spread that terrible things lurked in these lands. Most people were content to leave the untamed lands as they were. However, as time went on, the world developed other fears. I, however, am afraid of the woods, as were our ancestors. When I was 8 years old, my family moved to the small forest town of Sunderland, Vermont. My parents wanted a quiet place that wasn't so crowded, somewhat in contrast to a place like Boston. I didn't particularly want to move, but I hated Boston anyway, so I didn't object. The house my parents bought was a rustic 2-story with a backyard bordering the western edge of a forest. For the first 7 years I lived in Sunderland, everything was normal. The forest and I had a healthy relationship. I stayed within sight of the house and never went in after dark. That all changed when I was a junior in high school. That's when my nightmare began. It was a late summer afternoon and the sky was cloudy and gray. My friend Chris and I went into the woods behind my house to smoke a joint he had bought from a kid in our math class for $30. It was a fat joint, but Chris was definitely getting gypped. "We don't have to go far. I just don't want my parents to see us," I said to Chris. "Haven't you ever been deeper than here?" he asked. "A few times with my mom and dad, but otherwise I was never really interested." "Then it's time for you to have an adventure," he said, "and I have the perfect solution for your fear of getting lost." Chris stopped and dropped his backpack at his feet. He rummaged around for a moment and took out a can of red spray paint. "We can paint a ring on the trees we pass so we don't get lost." "Why do you even carry this around?" I asked. "You never know when you want to mark your territory." "You're an idiot, dude," I laughed. We continued into the forest with Chris leading the way. I let him walk in front of me as we continued on ground that had been softened by years of decay. After a few minutes, he suddenly slowed down, but then rushed to say, "Hey, Heather, come see this." "What is it?" I asked as I approached him. "Look at this hole." There was a pit just a few meters in front of Chris. It was probably 3 to 4 meters in diameter. It looked as if someone had used a giant excavator to lift a perfect cylinder out of the forest floor. There were rope-like tendrils hanging from the edges, but the walls of the hole were strangely smooth. "How deep do you think it is?" I heard Chris light the joint. "That's good enough," he muttered to himself. "I don't know. Let's just throw something in." I kicked a stone in and waited for it to hit something, but there was only silence. Chris threw in some branches while I stood close to the edge and watched them fall into the darkness. Silence again. "Eerie," Chris exhaled and handed me the joint. "Thanks," I said, took a deep drag and peered into the pit. It was almost mesmerizing. However, the longer I stared, the more nervous I became. I felt as if something were staring at me from the darkness. I took another drag and passed the joint on. "I don't like this hole," I said. "My head hurts when I look into it." We passed the joint and stared into the pit. "What do you think is down there?" Chris asked. "Probably dirt and lots of vermin." "I hate vermin," Chris said, kicking a piece of dirt into the hole. "I don't know, they can be kinda cool except for spiders." "Yeah, screw spiders. And screw this pit. Let's go home," Chris said, tossing the still smoldering butt into the pit. We watched as the light was swallowed by the darkness that filled the hole. "Man, that's deep," I whispered before turning to follow Chris, who was walking back. As we made our way to my house, I had the feeling that I had seen or done something that was not meant for me. That evening, I kept seeing this place in my nightmares. In my dream, I stared up at Chris and me from the pit. As Chris threw the butt into the pit, I watched it fall in slow motion, which seemed like an eternity to me. When the glowing tip finally went out, an inhuman scream sounded, piercing my eardrums like a hot awl. My vision shot cannonball-like out of the pit and swept through the trees in the forest until it came to a halt right outside my bedroom window, where I saw myself sleeping. I woke up immediately and looked out of my bedroom window, my eyes wildly searching for anything new or unusual. But there was nothing. I sat there hyperventilating for several seconds before I began to calm down. The next day at school, I hurried to the back of the library to see Chris during our free period together. "Hey man, how are you?" He didn't answer. "Yo, are you all right?" I put my hand on his shoulder and he jumped. "Shit, you scared the shit out of me," he said sleepily, rubbing his eyes. "Sorry, I was taking a nap. I didn't get much sleep last night." Was he having the same dream? I thought to myself. I didn't ask. I just wanted it to be a weird nightmare. I sat down at the table across from him and took out my laptop. "So, what's good?" I asked. "Not much, but get this. After I went home last night, I kept thinking about the hole." "That was weird, right?" Chris replied. "Yes, very," I replied. So I decided to do some Googling about really deep pits and came across this thing called Mel's Hole. In the 90s, a guy called this paranormal radio show and talked about this hole he found that was so deep that even a 24,000-meter-long fishing line didn't reach the bottom. The whole thing could be a hoax, but it got me thinking. How can a hole like the one we found exist? I don't know, but something is definitely not right. And by the way, can we stop calling it the hole? It bothers me to call it that. How about Heather's Hole? It is in your backyard after all. Fuck that, that's gross. I laughed. Something else. How about the circle? It was a perfect circle after all. That's better. Should we go back there later and take a look? Chris asked. Wasn't he afraid of this thing like I was? I don't know, Chris. The circle really makes me nervous. So, what are we supposed to do? Forget about it? Chris said with a hint of frustration. I don't know what I want to do, but... Chris interrupted me. You had a dream too, didn't you? I stared into his eyes. They twitched. Yes. The falling cockroach and then something coming out of the circle, right? Yes, I saw it too. I sat in silence for a moment. Do you want to go back after this? We had the same dream, man. That means something. Nothing happened. As far as we know, we just had scary and really similar dreams. Chris was right. But what if something did happen? Chris scratched his cheek. Then we'll see. All right then, I mumbled. Have you done the homework for Miss Kennedy's class? I had a lot of homework that day after school and wasn't in the mood to mingle, so I decided to spend the evening at home. As I worked on a short story for my American storytelling class, I heard my parents come home from work. I kept typing as I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. They stopped right outside my bedroom door. What's going on? I shouted. There was silence. Mom? I waited for an answer. Dad? Again, silence. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as I remembered the dream from the night before. I sat frozen in my chair until a heavy pounding on the door made me jump in my seat. I stared at the door for what seemed like hours, paralyzed with fear. After a few minutes, I heard the front door open again, this time accompanied by my parents' voices. I breathed a sigh of relief. I'm just imagining it, I told myself. I opened my bedroom door to feel safer now that I knew my parents were home. With a slight tremor, I resumed writing my short story. Later that night, as I was falling asleep, the same dream I had the night before played out before me. Again, I woke up after seeing myself asleep in my bed, this time shaking and drenched in sweat. I jumped out of bed and closed the blinds. I looked at my alarm clock, 3:02 a.m. Suddenly, I heard slow, methodical footsteps coming up the stairs again. I quickly pushed the mini fridge in my room in front of the bedroom door and went back to bed, huddled under the covers, staring at the doorknob. Slowly, it began to turn. Go away, go away, go away, go away, I pleaded quietly. There was the sound of something running at the door, and then bang, 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 bang. The door shook one last time, then silence. I stared at the door until I fell back into a restless sleep. The next morning, I was awakened by a loud banging on my door. I jumped. "Heather, open the door," my mom called. I sighed with relief as I got out of bed and pushed the fridge away from the door. My mom opened it immediately. "Why was your door blocked?" I considered telling her the truth, but knew she wouldn't believe me. "I moved my furniture last night and forgot to put the fridge back. Sorry." My mom looked at me exasperatedly. "Okay, but don't put it in front of the door." "What if there was a fire?" "Sorry, Mom." "Come down for breakfast. Dad made waffles." When I arrived at school, I immediately met up with Chris. "I think something followed us from the circle." "What are you talking about?" Chris replied. "So, nothing happened to you last night?" "No, why?" "Something tried to get into my room." "How do you know that?" "Just trust me, Chris. Damn it, I'm serious." "Calm down, just tell me what happened." I told Chris everything I had experienced the previous night. "My God, do you think it'll happen again tonight?" "I don't know. Probably. We have to do something." "We don't even know what this thing is or what it wants. What can we do?" "Maybe there's some kind of sacrifice we can make." "I think the fire from the joint woke it up, so there must be something we can do to maybe calm it down." "I don't know. That's what they do in horror movies." "This is real life." "Well, do you have a better idea?" "No, I don't think so." "We should try throwing some meat and jewelry into the hole after school." "That's oddly specific." "What else do demons want? Flowers and mixtapes?" I replied sarcastically. "All right, then, we'll take meat and jewelry. I'll bring what I can to your house around 5 o'clock. "Sounds good." That afternoon, I saw Chris walking down my driveway. "You ready?" I asked him. "Yeah, you?" "You don't look so good," Chris replied. "I don't really want to go back there, but I'd rather fix whatever's going on." We both followed the marked trees to the circle. "Yuck," Chris exclaimed, holding his nose. "Smells like rotten eggs." "Did it smell like that last time?" I asked. I couldn't remember. Definitely not. I peeked over the edge and felt the urge to jump. I stepped back. "All right, let's throw our offerings in." Chris threw some leftover meat he had in the fridge into the hole, and I threw jewelry I no longer wore, some gold, some silver. Nothing happened. "Was that it?" Chris asked. "We won't know until tomorrow." I felt a sense of relief, as if a heavy stone had been lifted from my shoulders. We went back to my place and played video games until Chris had to go home. As night fell, I was restless but hopeful. So far, I hadn't heard anything unusual. When I went to bed, I lay listening to the dark silence, afraid it wouldn't last. To my surprise, it did. I finally fell asleep and didn't wake up until morning. The sacrifice must have worked. When I arrived at school, I approached Chris during our free period. "Hey man, I think we did it," I exclaimed. I don't know about that, Chris replied absently. My heart sank. What do you mean? When I got home last night, my whole house smelled like rotten eggs. I tried to find the source of the smell for about an hour, but at some point I couldn't smell it anymore. So I just went to my room and went on Reddit. Just as I was falling asleep, I heard glass shattering downstairs. I thought it was probably just my cat knocking over a glass or something. But when I went downstairs, the glass from the front door was all over the living room floor. I couldn't see anyone outside, but I had this horrible feeling that I shouldn't go outside. Where were your parents? Out for the evening. They didn't come back until after all this. And then what happened? I didn't go outside. I called my parents and told them someone had thrown a rock through the front door, and they said they'd take care of it when they got home. I just went to my room and watched Bleach and Shy-Bay videos to calm down, but I just couldn't shake the fear. Then I heard those heavy footsteps running down the hallway outside my bedroom. My heart was racing like crazy. They arrived at the end of the hallway, then ran in the opposite direction until finally something heavy crashed into my door. At that point, I totally freaked out, especially when I realized that I had left my cell phone downstairs. Why didn't you call the police when your door was broken? I don't know. I can't always think straight when I'm scared. Okay, I'm sorry. Just tell me the rest. Chris sighed. Anyway, I also heard footsteps above me in the attic. Then something started knocking on my window, but I was too scared to open the curtains. Finally, I heard my parents' car driving up the driveway, and suddenly all the noises stopped. It took me a few minutes to calm down, but I told my parents that I thought someone had broken in and might be hiding in the house. They called the police, who came over and did a search. Did they find anything? No, but they said they'd post a car outside for a few nights just to make sure no one came back. And what should we do? Chris was silent for a minute. What if it wants something alive? No, Chris, I won't do that, I said sternly. Do what? Make a sacrifice. Are you serious? Well, your damn jewels and flesh didn't work either. Chris was getting more and more agitated. I understood his fear, but I didn't want to do anything violent to appease this thing. Look, man, I want to end this as much as you do, but not like that. It doesn't have to be a dog or a goat or anything. We could just trap a squirrel or a rabbit or something and throw it in. I sighed. If you catch them, then it's fine. Thank you. We'll put an end to this. I really hope so, I said. By the way, have you corrected Ms. Chambers' essay? Oh my God. That night I dreamt again, but the nightmare had changed. I was dangling in the pit, clinging to a vine. I was filled with dread as I peered into the darkness below. I tried to climb out, but the vine snapped. As I fell deep into the abyss, windows suddenly appeared in the dirt and stone that surrounded me. I could see my family, Chris and Fenster, showing families and children in ancient clothing. The further I fell, the more disturbing the images through the windows became. My eyes filled with tears. I saw people I knew from school crying blood in silence. I saw my parents lying motionless in the backyard. I saw Chris crying in his bed, his teeth bloodied. My descent slowed until I landed in a bed, my own bed, and my bedroom formed out of the darkness. There was a steady knock at my window, and I slowly climbed out of bed despite my overwhelming fear. I felt as if I were walking through water as I moved across my room. As I approached the window, I could see the outline of Chris standing in my garden. My window unlocked and opened gently, a cool breeze blowing in. "Chris?" I called. He started laughing. The sound of a crowd, not a single boy. He sank to the ground as the world around me began to shake. When I woke up, my bed was shaking violently. I started screaming and suddenly it stopped. My heart was racing and I barely had time to catch my breath when I heard a light tapping on my window. I tried to ignore it, but the longer I ignored it, the louder it got until I heard the glass break. Then silence. I didn't want to look out the window. I picked up my cell phone and dialed Chris's number. He picked up almost immediately. "Are you okay? What's going on?" Chris said. "More has happened. We have to finish this tomorrow. Did the traps catch anything?" I said between heavy breaths. "I haven't checked yet. What happened?" I woke up from a nightmare, shaking, and something hit my window. "Were you awake when I called?" "Yes, a lot has happened here too. I went downstairs to get a glass of water and all the windows and doors in the whole house were wide open. I tried to wake my parents, but they were fast asleep." "What about the police? Wasn't there one stationed outside? They were asleep too." "The cops are really useless. Is everything else okay?" I heard footsteps all over the house, so I just hid in my room. I'll go to bed when the sun comes up. "I don't blame you. Just take care of yourself. Will you stay on the phone?" "Yeah, sure. I can't sleep anyway." I stayed on the phone with Chris until the sunlight shone through my windows. All night long, I could hear what sounded like distant whispers outside my window, but it disappeared with the darkness. The rest of the day was normal, and we met after school in my backyard. My parents were still at work when I waited in front of my house smoking a cigarette. After a few minutes, Chris came around the corner holding 2 humane traps. In one sat a large rabbit, in the other a restless raccoon. My breath caught in my throat at the thought of what would happen to these innocent forest dwellers. "Are you ready to put an end to this?" Chris asked me. "More ready than you can imagine, but I feel bad about the animals." Chris looked at the animals and frowned. "I'm not thrilled either, but it's the only thing that still makes sense. Come on, let's get started." The 2 of us walked through the forest, following the marked trees to the circle. The landscape around us was silent. Inside the cages, the animals raged, biting at the cages and making terrible noises. I felt both emotional pain and physical fear. As we approached the circle, Chris turned to me. "Does it look bigger to you than before?" I looked at him. I wasn't sure, but it definitely seemed bigger. "Yeah, it kinda looks bigger." "Okay, you want to throw 'em?" Chris asked, lifting the cages. "I really don't want to. I'd cry if I did." "Damn, okay, I'll do it." Chris walked to the edge of the circle, peered inside, and took a deep breath. "Okay." I watched as Chris threw the panicked animals into the abyss, and the whimpering and screaming stopped as the circle engulfed them. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I wiped my face with my sleeve. "Is that it? Can we go now?" "Let's hope it works." "Yes, let's go back and get one done. I need to relax now." When night fell, we parted ways. The events of the last few days, since we stumbled upon the circle, had been stranger and more stressful than anything I'd experienced before. I just hoped this would be the end of it. Since it was Friday night, I stayed up very late. I still couldn't sleep. At 1 a.m., my parents had gone to bed and nothing had happened yet. I began to think that everything had worked out. I checked my phone. There were no notifications from Chris. I decided to call him just to check on him. I only reached his voicemail. He's just sleeping, I thought. I continued playing video games until I heard shouting outside my window. I recognized Chris's voice. I immediately ran to my window and opened it. There he was in the moonlit backyard, still in his pajamas and shaking. "Dude, what are you doing here? Did something happen?" I called out in a whisper. We have to go to the circle, right now. Things have gotten worse," Chris gasped. "What are you talking about? What happened?" "Oh," Chris sighed angrily and headed towards the forest without a flashlight. "Damn it! I said to myself as I put on some pants and grabbed a flashlight. I also grabbed a knife just in case. I went downstairs, being careful not to wake my parents, and went to the back door. Chris was gone. I was scared, but I didn't want to let my best friend go into the circle alone. It occurred to me that this could be a trick, an inhuman force appearing as Chris. That was a common twist in horror stories. Still, I didn't want to risk leaving Chris alone in the woods without a flashlight. I opened the door, took a deep breath, and made my way to the tree line. There was a standing fog in the woods as I followed the marked trees, calling Chris's name as I went. I held the knife firmly in my left hand as I moved cautiously through the forest. Finally, I came to the circle, which was wider than before. It seemed to be growing even before my eyes. There was a loud groan as a tree at the edge lost its hold on the ground and fell, disappearing silently into the abyss. "Heather," I heard Chris say behind me. "Chris," I called as I turned around. He was standing a few feet away from me, his head hanging. "What happened, man? Why are we here?" I don't know, but now it's even worse. It's worse, Heather." "Chris, calm down, talk to me." "No," Chris shouted. He pushed me and I fell. I looked back, the hole was getting closer. It was hungry. "Chris, what the hell?" I screamed as I stood up. He grunted and lunged at me. I dodged him, and he stumbled and almost fell into the widening chasm. "I have to, Heather. It's the only way." He lunged at me again and successfully pushed me up against a tree, my head slamming against the bark. When I hit the tree, I dropped whatever I was holding. He pushed me harder against the bark as I tried to push him away and push away, but he didn't budge. "I'm sorry, Chris," I shouted, as I brought my left leg between his knees. He went limp immediately as I grabbed the knife next to the tree. "Please calm down and tell me what happened," I said, panting. "I don't want to have to defend myself again." Chris groaned in pain and looked up at me before trying to pounce on me again. I dodged him and clumsily swung the knife. I think it may have torn his shirt, but it all happened so fast. I quickly moved away so I wasn't staring at the widening hole behind me and held the knife up. "Chris, please, stop it," Chris shouted, and lunged at me again. I swung the knife frantically as he approached, landing a blow to his torso. He put his hand to his chest and felt the warm blood seep between his fingers. He looked at me with a look of anger I had never seen before. I was scared before, but now I really feared for my life. "Please, Chris, I don't gamble." I tried to take a step back, but he lunged at me again. I raised the knife and stabbed at him, aiming at a spot that wouldn't kill him. He grunted as the blade of my knife sank into his right shoulder. He took a step back and looked me in the eye. "Heather." He stumbled back again, his foot catching on a stone at the edge of the circle. "Chris, no!" I jumped forward and tried to grab him as he fell backwards, but I was too late. I watched in horror as he disappeared screaming into the abyss. The ground shook as the hole stopped growing. I collapsed on the ground and cried there for several minutes, fear replaced by agony. "Chris, no!" I choked. I had killed my best friend. Although it was self-defense, I couldn't help but blame myself for what happened. I wanted to wake up, but this wasn't a dream. It was a nightmare come true. Too distraught to realize what had just happened, I grabbed my flashlight and stumbled home through the fog. As soon as I got home, I woke my parents and told them everything. They were skeptical, but my father agreed to follow me into the woods after seeing how upset I really was. The fog had disappeared, and I led him along the marked trees until we reached the end. He sighed. "Heather, there's nothing here. It was just a dream." My father sighed. I stared in disbelief at the solid ground in front of me. This was where the circle had been. I could see the stone that Chris had tripped over. and the churned earth where a tree had fallen into nothing. I leaned against a tree, overcome with nausea. "Honey, are you all right?" my father asked, putting a hand on my shoulder. It must have been a dream," I said. I didn't believe it. Everything I had just experienced seemed so real. The circle, the knife, the blood, Chris's screams. It was all etched into my brain. But I didn't want to rationalize it at that moment. We returned home, and I went to bed, although I never fell asleep. I tried to call Chris all night and the following days, but he never picked up. His parents didn't answer the phone when I called their house either. I knocked on their door, but it seemed like no one was home. The following Monday, Chris didn't come to school. Same thing on Tuesday and Wednesday. The police searched his house and found his two parents dead in some kind of bloodbath. The police assumed that Chris had murdered his parents and run away to avoid arrest. But I knew the truth. Chris was dead. I was the only one who knew what had really happened to him. But what could I say? People would just think I was crazy, or that I was covering for my friend. The circle was gone. So was my best friend. But the memories would never fade, nor would the constant struggle to come to terms with what happened and why. Believe me when I say that I have not spent a day in the forest since then. I have been what some might call a wilderness expert for almost 2 decades. I plan my excursions into various forests very carefully to ensure I get out alive. I take all the supplies I need to survive for a few weeks should I get lost, and I also have a satellite phone, a GPS, and a weapon as a last resort. Sometimes getting lost in the woods is part of the fun. That is, if you know what you're doing, of course. The story I am sharing with you today is about a young man who did not take all the precautions I would recommend for a trip into an unfamiliar forest. On my last expedition in the Superior National Forest in Minnesota, I came across a diary hanging on a tree. There were only a few pages left in the diary. The rest had been torn out to be used as kindling, as the author of the diary indicated. The content of this diary is very strange, and I will come back to that later. But without further ado, my name is Anthony Lawrence. I am a college student at Bemidji State University. I don't know the exact date, but I first came here on August 3rd, 2017. I think it's been about 2 weeks now. If you find this journal, you can stop looking for me. I don't have much room left in this journal, so I'll have to try to be brief. About a week before I came here, I got a message on Facebook from a guy looking for healthy young adventurers who wanted to make some money. He said he would give me $1,000 to spend 48 hours in the forest, using whatever resources I had available to survive. Apparently, he was writing some kind of book about survival in the wild and wanted to see what people do to survive in 48 hours. He would provide each participant with a backpack with limited provisions and a GoPro camera to capture the adventure. I used to be a Boy Scout and figured that 2 days in the woods couldn't be that hard. And with that kind of money, I could buy a new gaming chair for my dorm room and have enough money left over for pizza for the whole next semester. I wrote him back and we set up a date to meet. I should bring nothing but sturdy clothing. He said he would provide everything I would need to survive for 2 days in the forest. When I met with him, he seemed like a nice enough guy. He was obviously very wealthy, too, because he dropped me off at my spot in the forest with his private helicopter. During the flight, he explained to me that the backpack was equipped with a GPS tracking device so that he could find and pick me up anywhere after the 48 hours. I thought it was safe to assume that this guy knew what he was doing, considering how much preparation work he had put into this, so I trusted him. He dropped me off and flew away. I spent the first few minutes organizing the contents of my backpack. Inside was a simple pocket knife that I stuffed into a front cargo pocket of my pants for quick access. I got a small diary that I also put in my cargo pants. The rest of the contents consisted of a matchbook with 2 matches, a full water bottle, one of those silver thermal blankets, some rope, and various other items that you would expect to find in a survival kit, but which I doubted I would use. Oh, and of course the GoPro strapped around my chest. There was no map, compass, or any kind of navigational equipment. The idea was presumably that I had gotten lost in the forest and had to survive. So, I set out on my journey. I spent most of the first day trying to hike in as straight a line as possible. Apart from the clearing where we landed, there were so far only densely forested areas. My first goal was to find a water source that I could return to if necessary, but so far I had no luck. I was dropped off in the early afternoon, so it was already getting dark, and the temperature was dropping. I decided it was time to set up camp. I collected various small branches and twigs in the area, and found a small clearing where I could build a fire without setting the whole forest on fire. With my tiny pocket knife, I cut smaller branches from the surrounding trees, and managed to pile up a decent supply of wood for the night. I had to use a few pages from that journal as kindling to get the fire started, and carefully lit one of the 2 matches I had to get it going. So far, so good. I got out the thermal blanket and lay down to sleep next to the fire. I woke up before sunrise. The fire was just a pile of ashes by then, and I didn't want to waste my last match so early to start a new fire, so I packed everything up and hit the trail again. After several hours of hiking, I finally heard something that was music to my ears. Running water. A stream. At this point, my water bottle was almost empty, so I was overjoyed to finally empty it and refill it. Ha! 2 days out here for $1,000. That was the easiest money I ever made. I followed the sound of the water to a small stream that seemed to go on for quite a while. After filling my bottle, I decided to follow this stream in the direction it was flowing, ideally to find a lake or something. There was plenty of daylight left, so I kept going. At this point, I was getting quite hungry, so it would be nice to find a lake with some fish in it. But even in the worst case, I could go 2 days without food, without getting into trouble. It was getting dark again, and the creek I was following was getting wider, but still no lake in sight. I should have set up camp while it was still light, but I was determined to find that lake and kept going. After a few more hours, it was just too dark to keep going. There was some moonlight shining through the leaves above me, but not much. Not enough to keep following this creek. So I did my best to gather some more wood for another fire in the darkness of the night and set up a makeshift camp again. I lit the fire again with pages from the diary and used my last match. I squatted down and lay down to sleep, excited to find that lake the next morning and get something to eat before the guy picked me up to go home. In the middle of the night, loud cracking woke me up. Branches were breaking all around me. Startled, I jumped up. I wasn't sure what kind of wildlife was out there, but it could well be bears or wolves. Adrenaline shot through my body, and I tried to hear where the sounds were coming from, but I could barely hear my heartbeat. However, I had to do something. I couldn't just stand there like an idiot waiting to be eaten. No matter what kind of animal it was, I felt that I would be safe if I could climb one of these trees. As the cracking of the branches got closer and louder, I started climbing a large pine tree near me that had many branches that made climbing easy. The fire went out very quickly, but I had enough residual light to start climbing. I climbed up 1, 2, 3, 4 branches, probably about 1.80 meters from the ground, when the sound stopped. So I stopped too. I pricked up my ears to listen, but it was difficult again to hear over my heartbeat. I sat there what felt like an eternity, with 2 of my hands clasping neighboring branches above, one of my feet braced, and the other foot dangling free. All around me now was silence. I thought that whatever it was now gone, and that I was safe. I adjusted my grip on the tree when the branch my foot was on broke off, and I lost my hold on the branches above. I fell backwards and hit my head on the hard ground, knocking me unconscious. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when I woke up, it was still dark. Even darker than before, it seemed to me. However, I was not lying on the ground where I had landed. I was on a flat surface, like a table. I tried to sit up and look around, but I couldn't move. Then I realized that my hands and feet were tied to this table. I panicked and tensed every muscle in my body to free myself from this trap. I kept shouting, "What the hell?" As I struggled, I heard what sounded like voices around me, but I couldn't understand what the voices were saying. I thought I was alone out here. I was literally in the middle of nowhere. Who the hell is out here? Who the hell ties people up in the middle of the forest? I kept jerking my body and felt the ropes that held me loosely loosen. That was when it got really scary. I don't know if I was drugged or what, but really crazy things were happening. I heard a loud, dull noise. I heard branches breaking. No, trees. Whole trees breaking in half from the noise. Something was coming closer to me. The voices around me grew louder and sounded like some kind of chant. I quickly realized that I was some kind of sacrifice. Maybe it was all just in my head, I really don't know. The absurdity of it all makes it hard for me to believe that whatever happened was real. The dull cracking of the wood grew louder and louder until I could see some kind of silhouette in the forest in front of me in the moonlight. It was huge. Whatever it was incredibly big. I freaked out like never before. I screamed while I kept trying to free myself from the bonds that held me down. As I watched the forest being torn down in front of me, the chanting of the voices grew louder. The beast was probably 100 meters away from me when I was able to free one of my hands. My face was a mess of tears and snot from crying, which I hadn't noticed until that moment. I freed my hand and quickly wiped my face before moving on to the other bonds. Once I had that one hand free, I was able to quickly loosen the other bonds. I got my other hand free and the creature let out a deafening roar. The chants around me fell silent. I quickened my pace and, trembling, set to work loosening the ropes around my feet. After only a few seconds, I was free of those as well. I jumped up from the table and started running. I fell almost immediately. I was incredibly dizzy. They must have given me drugs. I got up again and kept running from the beast. I could still hear the forest being cleared behind me, but I didn't turn around to look. I just kept running, struggling to overcome the dizziness and stay upright. Whatever this thing was, it was either very slow, or it just didn't care enough to chase me. After a few minutes of running, I couldn't hear the creature, the cracking of the trees, or the singing voices anymore. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Even if the creature wasn't pursuing me, it was likely that the source of those voices wouldn't let its victim get away so easily. Finally, I saw the sun rising on the horizon and figured I had run long enough. I stopped, leaned against a tree, and collapsed to the ground. I was so scared and in so much pain from the fall from the tree, the ropes around my hands and feet, the fall to the ground when I freed myself, and all the thorns and shit I had run into during my escape. I put my head between my legs and sobbed uncontrollably. After I'd calmed down again, I wiped my face with my shirt and assessed my situation. I had neither the backpack nor the GoPro. In my cargo pockets, I still had the small pocket knife. I wish I had realized earlier that I still had it, and this diary, but that was all. I almost had a nervous breakdown when I realized that the guy who had brought me here couldn't find me without that backpack. I had to pull myself together and figure out what I was going to do. The stream I had followed the previous night was nowhere in sight, as I had no idea where I was in relation to the stream, where I had started, or where the sacrificial site was that I had just fled. I had gotten lost before, but now I was truly lost. They say if you get lost in the woods, you should stay where you are, so you're not constantly running from the search parties they might send to find you. But I couldn't do that. Not with that creature out there and the cultists or whoever they were helping. I had to keep moving, and I had to come up with a plan to get that backpack back. After collecting myself for a few minutes, I stood up and started walking. I didn't know where I was going, but I figured I had a 50% chance of finding my starting point, the cultists' area, or the stream I was following if I just kept going. It was still a few hours before the 48-hour mark, so he would have to come looking for me soon. If I heard his helicopter, I could maybe signal to him somehow. I walked for hours, and everything was still so unfamiliar. The sun was at its highest point, but still no helicopter noise. I don't even know how far these people had taken me from where I thought I was. I could be miles away from where I thought I was. I kept walking all day. Finally, it got dark again, and I was still lost. I had no supplies. All I had was my pocket knife and my journal. Now, one thing I had learned in the Boy Scouts was how to start a fire by rubbing a few sticks together. So I got out my pocket knife and set about gathering wood. I knew I wouldn't sleep tonight. It was too risky, but I had to keep warm at least. After an hour of rubbing a few sticks together, I never had the patience to make that work. I finally had a fire going. I had to use more pages from the journal to start the fire, and at that point I figured I should save the pages. I didn't know how long I would be out here. As expected, I couldn't sleep at all. I sat by the fire all night, trying to keep the flames small so as not to attract unwanted attention. But nothing ever came to bother me. Morning came, and I'd been out here for almost 3 days now. I was overcome with hunger and thirst. If I wanted to stay out here for a while, I definitely had to find that stream again. I tried to remember which direction I had gone in the first 2 days, based on the position of the sun. I think I figured it out and went in the opposite direction, perpendicular to the direction I had gone the day before. I walked in that direction all day and still found nothing. So I set up camp and actually got a little sleep that night. The next day, I finally found some water. I don't know if it was the same stream I had seen before, but it didn't matter. At least I could survive a little longer. I bent over the stream and drank right out of it like an animal. I was amazed at how much I could drink and how satisfying it was. I used some of the water to wash my face and feet and set out to follow the stream to its source. I followed this stream for several days. I didn't want to stray too far from it, as it was the only thing really keeping me alive. Eventually, however, I came across a larger section of the stream where I saw several frogs and tadpoles. By this time, I was damn hungry. I didn't care how disgusting it was. I was going to eat those frogs. So I did just that. I made a small fire using the same technique I had now mastered quite well, cooked some frogs, and ate them. People say they taste like chicken, and they're not wrong. I followed the stream for the next few days, and it got wider. I started to think that I had found my way back, and my theory was confirmed when I saw the ashes from my second night's fire. Fortunately, this time I had daylight to work with. This is where I fell out of the tree, and they took me somewhere. I am by no means an expert at tracking, but there were clear signs of broken branches that I was able to follow, hopefully to where they had taken me. I followed this trail for a very, very long time, and just when I thought I wouldn't find what I was looking for, I saw it. I saw an opening in the forest where the animal had come through, and I saw the table where they had strapped me down. I kept my distance and assessed the area. I saw no signs of human or animal life, But if they had taken my backpack, it had to be nearby. Which brings me to the present. I'm writing all this down just in case I fail and don't get the backpack. I'll tie this journal to a tree nearby. If I don't come back for it, it probably means that whatever lurks in these woods has killed me. And as I said, you can stop looking. Whatever that thing was, if it wasn't my imagination, I have no doubt that it could kill me without much trouble. If you're reading this, I'm definitely dead. And that was all. There were no more blank pages for him to write on if he wanted to. I guess he used the rest of those pages to light a fire. I looked around the area where I found the diary for any evidence of his encounter, but I don't see any holes in the forest that could have been made by a large creature, nor do I see any table that he could have been tied to. As far as I can tell, there's no evidence that any of this actually happened. The date he had written was 2 years ago, so I did some research. As I mentioned earlier, there was something really strange about the whole thing, and I'm not talking about the creature he described. It's likely that the banging on his head had confused him, and his mind filled in the blanks with something that didn't actually happen. I Googled him first and found a missing persons report from August 2017. So he definitely existed. And this wasn't just some kind of prank diary that someone had left in the forest. Then I searched for him on Facebook. His last Facebook post just said, "Going camping for a few days, won't have cell reception. See you soon." So he didn't really tell people what he was planning to do. I contacted the boy's family and gave them this diary and tried to get more information from them. Of course, it was very difficult for them to digest, but my curiosity was greater and I needed to know more. I convinced them to log into their son's Facebook account, which they managed to do because his password was stored on the home computer, and search for the message he had mentioned in the diary. We found the message he had described in his diary from the guy who offered $1,000. The only thing is that this guy was a ghost. He never existed. His name doesn't show up in any database, and if he really was the author of a wilderness survival guide, I would have found something for sure. But no, it all seemed to be some kind of scam. Whoever this guy was, he actually convinced this kid to go into the woods alone, promising to pick him up after 2 days, probably with no intention of actually keeping the promise. How many kids did he do this to? Was there actually some kind of cult he was working with and sacrificing victims to? Well, hopefully the police can find out something. I doubt I'll ever hear about the results of their investigation, but I really hope they find this guy. I'll give you a little advice. Never go into the woods alone, especially not without any communication or navigation equipment. And for heaven's sake, tell someone where you're going. The scream echoed through the forest, raw and cutting, slicing through the suffocating silence like a knife. It wasn't just fear. It was something primal, desperate, a sound that seared itself into the soul. "Sarah!" Josh shouted in a cracked voice as he ran towards the sound. The rest of us stood frozen, the trees around us acting as a living wall. I wanted to call out, to tell him to stop, but my throat was like it was tied shut, the words trapped behind a rising tide of panic. My eyes flicked to Nate, hoping that he had a plan, but he was pale and shaking, his hand clenched around the knife he had pulled from his backpack. Then we heard it again. "Help me." The voice was weak, broken, but unmistakably Sarah's. It came from somewhere deep in the forest, where the shadows swallowed everything. But something was wrong. "It's not her," Nate whispered in an almost inaudible voice. Josh didn't stop. He disappeared into the darkness, the undergrowth crunching and cracking in his wake. I took a step forward, and every instinct screamed at me to stop. "Josh, wait!" The forest didn't answer, but something else did. A low, throaty growl boomed through the trees, followed by a wet, tearing sound that turned my stomach, and then silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that enveloped us like a shroud. 3 hours earlier, we didn't even know the side trail existed. We laughed carefree, and our biggest concern was whether we had enough water for the round. The forest felt alive, as forests do. Birds chirped, leaves rustled. Sunlight penetrated in golden rays through the canopy. Josh spotted the path first. It wasn't really a path, more of a faint gap between the trees. The undergrowth trampled just enough to suggest someone, or something, had recently passed through there. "Shortcut," he said, grinning and pointing. "It'll get us back to the car faster." I hesitated, staring into the shadowy thicket. Something about it felt wrong, but I couldn't explain why. The others didn't share my concerns. "Come on," Sarah said, brushing past me with her phone in hand, already snapping photos of the moss-covered trees. What could possibly go wrong? In retrospect, I wish I had stopped her. I wish I had turned around and taken the main path back to safety. But instead, I followed them as my stomach turned as we stepped into the unknown. It wasn't long before the forest changed. "This saves an hour on the round trip," Josh said, peering into the shady thicket. "Trust me." "We're not supposed to leave the main path," I replied, although my voice didn't sound convincing. Something about the path felt wrong. It wasn't exactly overgrown, but it also didn't look like anyone had used it in a while. By the time I decided to protest, the others were already on their way. Even the quiet Nate, who was usually on my side, shrugged and stomped after them. I hesitated, standing alone and staring into the trees. There was a strange silence around them, a silence that was too dense for a forest in the late afternoon. But the others were laughing and calling after me, and I didn't want to be the party pooper. The first 20 minutes passed uneventfully, if a little eerily. The trees became denser the further we went, and the air cooler. Josh kept trying to convince us that we were well within time, although my watch disagreed. "See? Piece of cake," he said, pointing to a clearing ahead of us. "We're probably almost—" He trailed off mid-sentence. I followed his gaze and frowned. The clearing wasn't a clearing at all. It was a strange depression in the ground, as if something heavy had recently been lying there. The grass was flattened in concentric rings, with jagged, claw-like cracks in the earth. "A bear, maybe?" Nate suggested, but his voice sounded too light, as if he didn't believe it. Josh laughed nervously. "Yeah, probably just a bear." We skirted the edge of the depression, none of us wanting to step any closer. A few minutes later, the forest started to feel off. At first, I couldn't put my finger on it. The trees all looked the same, their trunks oddly uniform, and the path, if you could still call it that, seemed to shift slightly underfoot. And then came the smell. At first it was weak, a metallic smell that made me feel sick. Sarah retched. "Yuck, what is that?" The smell grew stronger as we walked, though the others pretended not to notice it. I could feel it clinging to the back of my throat, thick and copper-colored, like rust and rotten flesh. Then I heard it. A sharp crack, like a branch breaking somewhere to our left. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. My voice sounded too loud in the silence. Josh shook his head. It was probably just an animal. But Sarah grabbed my arm and dug her fingers into it. "No, that didn't sound right," she hissed. Her face was pale, her eyes wide open. We froze and listened. The silence was now overwhelming and pressing in on us from all sides. Then another sound came, this time closer. A low, guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't anything I could recognize. "Let's keep moving," Nate said, his voice shaking. We picked up the pace, but the sounds didn't stop. Branches rustled, twigs snapped. Whatever was out there was following us. I glanced over my shoulder, my heart pounding. For a split second, I thought I saw a movement, something tall and thin, slinking between the trees. But by the time I blinked, it had vanished. "Josh," I said, my voice shaking, "are we even going in the right direction?" "I think so," he murmured, but the confidence was gone. We stumbled upon another clearing, even worse than the first. The ground was littered with bones. Animal bones, I told myself, though some looked disturbingly large. In the center of the clearing was something else, a tattered piece of cloth, dark in color and half buried in the dirt. Sarah screamed. Before I could stop her, she ran back into the trees. "Wait!" I called, but she was already gone. The three of us stood paralyzed until we heard her scream again, this time further away, muffled and abruptly interrupted. And then we heard it. A voice. It came from the trees, soft and plaintive. "Help, please. I'm hurt." It sounded like Sarah, but it wasn't her. Josh didn't wait. He followed the voice, crashing through the undergrowth like a wild animal. "Josh, stop!" I shouted, but he didn't even look back. Nate and I hesitated for a moment, staring at each other wide-eyed before the silence engulfed us again. We couldn't just leave him, or Sarah. My legs moved before my brain caught up, pulling me forward into the dense, suffocating forest. Nate followed close behind me, breathing in gasps. That didn't sound right, he whispered as we ran, his words spilling out of him as if he were suffocating on them. That wasn't her. I refused to believe that he might be right. The voice came again, now weaker, trembling. "Please, help me." It sounded exactly like Sarah, but something was wrong, like a recording played on a distorted tape. The pitch fluctuated slightly, too high, too low, stretching and compressing in a way that a human voice shouldn't. Josh's desperate calls overlapped it. "Sarah, where are you? Keep talking, we're coming." He was ahead of us, his shape barely visible through the dense trees, moving faster than was possible. The forest felt wrong, now more than ever, as if the trees were closing in and their bony branches were reaching for us. The path we had been on had vanished, replaced by uneven ground, littered with stones and gnarled roots that snagged our feet. Then we saw him. Josh was standing motionless in a small clearing, his back to us. The air here was different, heavier, suffocating. A faint mist hung in the air, caressing his legs like pale, groping fingers. "Josh," I called, my voice trembling. He didn't move. Nate grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. "Don't," he whispered. "Josh!" I called again, louder this time. My voice cracked and echoed unnaturally through the trees. Finally, he turned around, and my heart dropped into my pants. His face was pale, almost gray, his eyes glassy and wide open. His lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Then he whispered, "She's here." I followed his gaze and froze. At the edge of the clearing stood Sarah, or something that looked like her. Her clothes were torn and her hair hung in matted strands over her face. But her posture was wrong, stiff and unnatural, like a marionette on strings. Her head twitched slightly to the side, too fast, and then again, snapping back with a wet, crunching sound. "Sarah?" I took a step forward, although every instinct in my body was telling me to run away. "Help me," she said in a thin, broken voice. But her lips weren't moving. Josh took a step toward her. "It's okay, we're here," he said in a trembling voice. "No," Nate barked, pulling me back. "It's not her, look at her feet." I looked down and felt the blood freeze in my veins. Her feet weren't touching the ground. Josh didn't seem to notice, or didn't care. He walked closer to her, drawn like a moth to a flame. "Josh, stop," I cried, but it was too late. She moved suddenly, impossibly fast, closing the distance between them in a single, fluid motion. Her head snapped to the side again, and I caught a glimpse of something glinting in the dim light. Teeth, sharp and jagged, far too large for her mouth. Josh screamed. It was a sound I will never forget, raw and primal, filled with a terror that didn't belong in this world. He stumbled backward, clutching his arm, and we saw the blood, a dark, glistening stream flowing through his fingers. "Run!" Nate shouted, grabbing my hand and pulling me back into the trees. Josh's screams faded behind us, replaced by wet, tearing sounds that made my stomach turn. I wanted to turn around, but I couldn't. We ran blindly, stumbling over roots and crashing through branches. The forest around us blurred. The air felt thicker with every step, every breath a struggle. The smell was back now, stronger than ever, choking me and making my eyes water. And then the voice came again. "Don't leave me!" This time it wasn't Sarah, it was Josh. The voice, this thing using Josh's voice, was getting closer. It sounded wounded, pitiful, but still with the same distorted edge as before. Nate and I didn't slow down. We didn't talk. I think we both instinctively knew that if we stopped, we wouldn't start again. The trees grew darker and stood closer together, as if the forest itself were trying to guide us somewhere. The uneven ground scraped at our feet, and Nate stumbled, nearly pulling me down with him. I pulled him up, and we both breathed heavily as we continued on until the forest suddenly opened up into another clearing. It was wrong. All wrong. The space was perfectly circular, too perfect to be natural, and the trees around it leaned inward, their branches tangling above us to form a grotesque canopy. The ground was bare, blackened dirt in some places, and in the center stood a twisted wooden structure, some kind of crude effigy. It looked vaguely human, but grotesquely stretched, its limbs branching unnaturally like antlers. But that wasn't the worst of it. The air here, it was humming. Not audibly, but in a way that reverberated deep in my bones, a sickening vibration that made my teeth hurt and my vision blur. I stumbled back and grabbed Nate's arm for balance. "Do you feel that?" I whispered, though my voice sounded muffled, as if the clearing had swallowed the sound. Nate nodded, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the image. "We have to go," he said in a low, urgent voice. "Now." We turned to leave, but the forest behind us had vanished. Or rather, it had changed. The trees were no longer the tall, straight pines we had been walking through. These were older, gnarled trees, their trunks impossibly thick, and their branches twisted into unnatural shapes. The path we had come from had vanished, replaced by dense thicket that seemed to move and twist when I wasn't looking directly at it. Nate took a shaky step forward, but I grabbed his arm. "Wait," I whispered. That's when I saw it. Between the trees, right at the edge of the clearing, something was watching us. It was barely visible, a shadow darker than the surrounding darkness, but its eyes burned like embers and glowed faintly in the dim light. They did not blink. I squeezed Nate's arm, my fingernails digging into his skin. "Do you see?" "Yes," he interrupted me with a trembling voice. "I see it." We both froze, unable to move, as the thing shifted slightly and its shape became clearer. It was big, unbelievably big, its limbs unnaturally long and angular. It didn't move like a human. It flowed, its joints bending in ways that made my stomach turn. The buzzing in the air grew louder and sharper, as if it were coming from the creature itself. My vision blurred, and I felt a sudden, intense pressure in my head, as if my skull were being squeezed. Nate let out a muffled groan and stumbled back, hands pressed to his temples. The creature stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate, and that's when I noticed it. It was holding something, a piece of cloth, torn and blood-stained. Sarah's jacket. I felt the bile rise in my throat, but I couldn't look away. The creature raised its free hand and pointed at us, long, spindly fingers ending in claws, and the buzzing stopped. The silence was deafening, and then we heard it coming from the depths of the forest. A low, throaty howl, like a distorted imitation of a wolf's howl. "Run," Nate whispered in a barely audible voice. We ran, plunging into the tangled forest with no sense of direction. The air was thick and heavy, every breath a struggle, but we didn't stop. The forest seemed alive, branches reaching for us, roots rising to bring us down. The howling grew louder and louder, echoing from all sides, and I realized with a dawning horror that it wasn't coming from just one creature. There were more. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound was unnaturally distorted. Nate grabbed my hand and pulled me along as I stumbled over a root, and we stormed through another thicket towards an open area. This time it wasn't a clearing. It was the edge of a gorge, a steep precipice into the blackness that seemed to go on forever. We skidded and came to a stop dangerously close to the edge. "Now what?" I gasped, desperately looking for another way out. But the forest closed in behind us. The howling grew louder and approached. Nate turned to me, his face pale but determined. "We're going to fight it," he said, pulling a hunting knife from his backpack. I didn't even know he had it. "Fight what?" I asked, and panic rose in me. "We don't even know what it is." He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the forest, and then I saw them. Dozens of glowing eyes moving through the trees, too many to count. The creatures were getting closer, their distorted outlines winding between the trunks like smoke. And then, deep inside me, something changed. A strange clarity settled over me, cold and sharp. I picked up a heavy branch from the ground, my hands shaking but firm enough to hold it. If this was the end, we wouldn't go down without a fight. Nate's knuckles were white as he clutched the knife, his breath coming fast and shallow. I held the branch in front of me as if it could actually do something against whatever this was. The glowing eyes came closer, their light reflected by something smooth and wet. The creatures, if you could even call them that, emerged from the shadows and showed themselves in the weak, unnatural light at the edge of the gorge. They didn't have a uniform shape. Some were large and incredibly thin, their elongated limbs ending in razor-sharp claws. Others were smaller, curved, their backs covered with spikes that stuck out at grotesque angles. Their skin, or whatever passed for skin, it was stained and rough, as if it had been peeled off and poorly sewn back together. Worst of all were their faces, or what was left of them. What should have been facial features were hollow indentations, blurred shadows, or pulsing masses of flesh. The hum returned, louder than ever, vibrating through the ground and into my chest. It wasn't just noise, it was pressure, drilling into my skull and distorting my vision. My grip on the branch weakened, my arms shaking as if the noise was draining my strength. Nate took a step forward and raised the knife. His voice was a hoarse whisper. "Stay back." The next creature tilted its head curiously and then opened its mouth. There was no sound, but I could feel it. A tangible wave of fear washing over me. Its mouth was a gaping maw of jagged teeth, moving and rearranging like something alive. Another animal came closer, faster than I could follow, its spindly limbs scuttling like a spider's. It lunged at Nate, and he swung the knife wildly, striking it in the torso. A thick, black pus spurted from the wound, hit the ground with a hiss, and filled the air with the stench of burnt hair. The creature screamed. an ear-splitting, unnatural sound that didn't stop when it should have. The others reacted, their guttural cries merging into a deafening cacophony. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Nate by the arm and pulling him away from the approaching swarm. But there was nowhere to flee to. Behind us was the steep gorge, and the creatures were approaching from all sides. My mind raced, every instinct screaming at me to do something. But what could I do? The hum became sharper, more insistent, until I thought my skull might burst under the pressure. And then, as if responding to an invisible signal, the creatures stopped. Each of them froze, their heads turning in unison towards the center of the clearing. I followed their gaze, and my heart sank. The ground beneath the image moved. The blackened earth broke open and bulged as if something were pushing up to the surface. Long, spindly fingers, no, roots, broke through the earth and writhed as if they were alive. The image itself began to writhe and twist, its wooden limbs splintering as something massive and wrong pushed out from within. It wasn't just one creature, it was all of them. Dozens of limbs, faces, and bodies merged into a writhing, pulsating mass that defied reason. Eyes blinked open on the surface, too many to count, and each stared directly at us. The air grew colder, the pressure more intense, as if the thing was sucking the life out of the forest itself. The creatures around us began to kneel, their twisted forms bowing reverently to the abomination. I wanted to scream, run, do anything, but my legs were nailed to the ground, my body paralyzed by the sheer wrongness of what I saw. Nate grabbed my arm, his voice barely audible over the humming and the shifting earth. "We have to jump." "What?" I turned to him, my voice trembling. "Are you crazy?" He pointed to the gorge. "It's either that or this." The creature in the clearing let out a low, booming growl that sent a shiver down my spine. One of its massive, root-like limbs stretched out towards us, stretching incredibly wide. I didn't think. I couldn't. I grabbed Nate's hand, and together we leaped into the darkness. For a moment, there was nothing but the rush of air and the pounding of my heart. Then we hit water, icy, bone-chilling water that took my breath away. The current was strong, pulling us along like rag dolls. I fought my way to the surface, gasping for air and catching a glimpse of Nate struggling to keep his head above water in front of me. The walls of the gorge were high, the trees above them silhouetted in the dim light of the moon. The creatures did not follow us. Whatever horror we had left behind seemed to be tied to the forest, unwilling or unable to chase us into the depths. It seemed like hours before the current slowed and deposited us on a rocky shore. I crawled out, coughing and shivering, onto the slippery stones and collapsed next to Nate. Neither of us said a word for a long time. Finally, he broke the silence. "What the hell was that?" I shook my head, unable to answer. The memory of the thing in the clearing, the way it moved, the way it looked at us, was seared into my mind. But even worse than that was the feeling, the certainty that it wasn't over yet. We had escaped to the forest, but something told me that we hadn't left it behind us. Not entirely. My wife and I recently purchased a log cabin deep in the woods of northern Minnesota. Actually, it was just 6 months ago. I was never much of a nature person, having grown up in a fairly large city in southern Minnesota and rarely seeing the great outdoors, as I heard many people refer to it. My wife, on the other hand, is a woman who loves the land. Having grown up miles from my hometown and surrounded by forests and farmland her whole life, I don't think there's a single city slicker in her entire body. Nevertheless, I somehow managed to convince her to buy a house with me in a small town, with the stipulation that, if finances allowed, we would buy a cabin where we would spend half the year, and, well, Unfortunately for me, she reminded me of that promise. My wife decided that the 6 months she wanted to spend in the cabin would be from October through March. Why anyone would choose to move further north during the 6 coldest months of the year to the damn ice capital of the central United States is beyond me, but my wife insisted. "Please, James," she had begged, "you know that my favorite seasons are fall and winter." And she was right. I knew that. When she was growing up, she loved watching the leaves change color in the fall, and the first snowfall was always magical for her. After some more begging, I gave in. "All right, but don't slide closer to me if you freeze your ass off at night," I replied, with a slight smile creeping onto my lips. A big, childlike smile spread across Samantha's, or Sammy, as I affectionately called her, face when she heard my answer. Her smile always seemed to light up the room, even when we were kids, and it always made my heart beat faster. "Better not smile like that when we get up to the cabin. You might scare away all the game," I grinned. Her smile turned into a half-offended, half-amused grin as she patted me on the arm. "You asshole." I chuckled softly at the memory as I drove down the winding dirt road through the forest. Sam turned her head to look at me. "What's so funny?" she asked, raising an eyebrow slightly. "Oh, nothing. Just laughing at myself," I said, shooting her a glance. She rolled her eyes as a growl echoed in her throat. I turned my gaze back to the road and immediately slammed on the brakes, slamming us both into our seatbelts. On the other side of the road, a mutilated deer limped from side to side. Its belly was torn open, leaving a trail. It was amazing how it was still able to move. Sam and I looked at each other and then back at the deer, which had almost completely retreated into the forest before collapsing. "What the heck?" I muttered, turning around to look at her. She shrugged. "Probably from black bears. They're known to hunt deer." "Do they hunt humans too?" I asked, half jokingly. "Not usually, but I'm sure they'd make an exception for you." "Oh, what the heck," I said, and pressed the gas again. We slowly passed the carcass as we drove along the road. When we were a few meters away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw a black flash, and the deer was slowly dragged into the bushes. I've always hated seeing wild animals die, but that's nature, I guess. We drove for about 15 more minutes before arriving at the small, cozy cabin. Actually, it was still about a week before October when we decided to spend our stay up here. But since it was our first time, we decided to come a week early to get settled, and so I could look around for possible work for our time up here. Being an electrician, I could work anywhere I had my tools and the materials needed for the job, and well, I had one of those things. My wife worked from home in the oil and gas industry, so it was no problem for her. "Oh, it's beautiful," she enthused. "It's perfect." I have to admit that even for someone like me who likes the country life, it was a sight to behold. Maybe staying out here isn't so bad after all. "We can look later. Come on, let's unload our stuff," I said, starting to unhitch the small travel trailer we had brought with us. She nodded and opened the rear passenger door of the truck, taking out our suitcases and everything else we had in the trunk. "What's this?" she asked, showing me a small recording device. "Oh, Jace wanted me to bring that. Something for him to laugh about when we get back." I took the small device and put it in my pocket. Jace was a good friend of ours from middle school. After I told him about the cabin, he laughed. He told me to bring a recording device so I could document my efforts to survive out here, as he called it. The asshole. But instead of just documenting my misery, I had decided to make recordings once a month or when important events occurred. "You, living in the forest? I'd be surprised if you lasted 3 weeks, he had said. Sam just smiled. Of course he would. We both took our respective bags and brought them to the porch. I fished the key from my back pocket, which the realtor had given me when I bought it, unlocked the door, and opened it for us both so we could enter the cabin. We placed our bags on the inside door to hold it open and went back to the trailer to finish unloading and getting our living situation in order. After emptying the trailer and truck and taking the boxes to the rooms by contents, we decided to call it a day. We have almost a full week to get everything set up. Samantha went to bed after we kissed goodnight, and I decided to record this first entry. Well, it's been a few weeks since my first recording. The cabin is set up exactly the way Sam wants it, and God knows she's picky. It's borderline OCD, to be honest. She's gone to bed by now, so I guess these recording sessions will have to be a nighttime affair. Fortunately for me, she gets off work a few hours before I do. Usually, she wakes up a few hours before me, so I guess it evens out. We haven't really done much since we moved here. I have found a job nearby that I will be starting in the near future. It's just a small job, maintaining the electrics of a warehouse and fixing whatever needs fixing, so it's been nice. Sam, as always, is busy with her work, so we are both pretty busy during working hours. Last weekend, she decided to take advantage of the great outdoors and do a little shooting. She took her old .22 that she's had since she first knew how to hold a gun and shoot straight, as well as the .30-06 her grandfather gave her after he passed away. She's always been a pretty good shot. I don't think there's a target she can't hit with one shot. I've tried it myself. I'm not quite at her level, but I can hit most targets within the first 2 rounds. Occasionally, I may have to fire a few more shots. My old man took me to the shooting range once or twice a month. We like to have friendly competitions to see who can hit the target the most times before going through 15 rounds. Of course, she wins every time. "Damn," I whispered to myself after my last round hit the ground next to the target. "You're getting better." I could feel her smirk. "You only missed 5 of your shots." Yeah, give me that .357 Magnum and I'll hit every shot," I replied, nodding toward the bag it was in. "Yeah, that's right, you can't miss with a thing like that." She laughed. "Exactly." I smiled, turning back to her. I switched the weapon to safety mode. "Are we done?" She nodded, reached for the small .22, and we went back inside. That's more or less all that's happened since we arrived. I have to admit that I like it up here a bit better than I expected. Of course, I would still prefer our other home, but I could get used to this one too. It's getting pretty late, and I should get some sleep for tonight. I have to go to work in the morning. My next recording will probably be on my birthday. I'm sure Sam has something planned. She always does. Sam organized a little surprise birthday party for me. My parents drove up here and will stay until the morning. I had to come out to my truck to record this, since my parents are in our room and Sam and I sleep on an air mattress in the living room. Her parents decided to make the trip home and left a few hours ago. It was nice to see them again. I haven't seen them since. Wait, what the hell is that? Damn, that scared me. A deer was sitting at the edge of the forest, just visible in the light of the house porch lamps. At first, it looked like just the skull. I thought it was just sitting on a post, left there as some kind of crazy housewarming gift, but it turned its head and disappeared. Must have just been a trick of the light, or I'm just tired. I'll call it a day and head inside. It's getting pretty cold now that it's later in the year and winter is approaching. Well, Jace, you wanted me to record how I survive out here. So I'm going to make you listen every damn minute I have something to say. Since the night I saw the deer, it smelled pretty bad. I've smelled the scent of decomposing animals before, and this is pretty much what it's like. I asked Sam about it, but she didn't have much to say. Animals die all the time. There might have been one that recently wandered along the edge of the forest. It should be gone in a few days. I hope so. It's driving me crazy. On the plus side, my new job is going pretty well. I've already experienced some pretty stupid shit there, had to replace some cables, pipes, and who knows what else, but for the most part it was easy and smooth, which is good. Easy money is the best money, as I'm sure you know. Sam's job is the same as always. She sits at that damn laptop almost all day. The internet out here is a lot less stable than in the other house, so I often hear her cursing at the computer, which I find amusing. I saw a lot of wildlife storming through the garden, deer, and even a few moose. Huge things. I didn't even know we had those here. I don't know where there are so many of them. Maybe they move when the seasons change? I don't know. I don't know anything about animals. Like I said, I'm a city boy. They all looked like they were running away from something or trying to escape. They all seemed kind of crazy, like their bones didn't fit together right or their skin didn't fit right. But they were too far away to tell. Maybe a bear got them all? It would have to be one hell of a bear to make an elk run or hurt it that bad. I didn't think moose were the kind of animal that would run away from anything, though. But I don't know. Tomorrow, I'll try to get Sam out of the cabin so we can do something. Maybe take a short hike in the woods. She might like that. Merry Christmas to anyone who hears this. We came back down for the weekend. We'll be staying at home until January 1st. It's good to be back. Nothing too interesting has happened since the last recording, so I won't say anything more until we return. It's all fucked up here. We just arrived at the cabin, and it looks like someone broke in through the cabin. The door is off its hinges and just lying on the porch. There's trash all over the place. Looks like whoever it was also demolished the closed trailer. It's all dented and smashed, and the boxes we used for the move are all over the yard in shreds. Really, James? Do you have to record this now? Sam asked. Well, Sammy, I'm sure Jason, whoever else is listening, wants to hear this. Damn it, she sighed. Just help me clean up. Well, I don't think Sam liked me recording our reaction. She was pretty annoyed about it. I guess I'll sleep on the couch tonight. I just woke up to some weird noises. It sounds like a person calling. It sounds like Sam from outside. I'm going to the door now. Damn, it's cold. Holy crap, I think I see her. Why is she standing out here? Sam? Sammy? J-A-M-S? Sammy, what the hell are you doing? Jamis. It's damn cold, honey. Come back inside. James, what the hell are you doing? Sam said. Wait, who the hell is that? Now they're gone. Sam came out of the bedroom and was totally terrified, which I honestly can't blame her for. I asked her to get the shotgun to scare them away, but it wasn't until I fired at the ground in front of them that they ran away. Before that, however, they let out this almost inhuman scream. It was definitely human, but it was just so animalistic. The lightning made them visible for half a second, and they looked so wrong. Definitely some drug addict high as a kite. I'm just glad they're gone now. Listening to it now, it seems so obvious that it wasn't my Sam. I mean, the pitch is there, but it's so off. I'm just chalking it up to my tiredness. Sam apparently forgave me for what happened earlier, because she's letting me in bed after I recorded this, or maybe she's just scared. Either way, I'm not complaining. This couch blows. I don't know how well I'll be able to sleep tonight with that freak out there, but we'll see. I know I said I'd only do these once a month or so, but things are getting stranger, almost paranormal. I don't mind the idea of ghosts or spirits and all that. My wife and I are Christians. Well, that's the simplest way to describe it. We don't follow any one organized religion exactly, but you could call us Christian. We have heard strange noises at night. Our 2 names have been called, and other strange noises. I don't know exactly how to explain it. The smell of decomposition is back too. Last night I saw this deer thing. I think it's a deer. I'm not so sure anymore. It could be someone in a deer mask, but it looked so decayed from where I was, And when I looked at it, the smell of death was overwhelming. I'm honestly scared. I haven't told Sam yet, for fear that she'll think I'm crazy, but I'm ready to just go home. I'll see if I can tell her in the morning. There's a huge snowstorm right now, and it's getting cold. I'm going to cozy up in bed with Sam and get some sleep. She's gone. Sam is just fucking gone. I woke up, and she was just not there. The truck is still outside, covered in snow. The door was wide open. It's freezing in here. I'm just putting my boots on while I record this. That motherfucker. I know they had something to do with this. The truck's not running, the tires slashed, the damn engine won't even start. Gas all over the place like they punctured the tank. I don't know where Sam is either. I've been running around out there calling her name, trying to find her. I kept hearing my name, the same damn voice from the other night. I swear, if I get my hands on those freaks. Sam still hasn't come back, and I've been looking for her for 3 days. I called the nearest police station. They sent out search parties, but nothing. I listened to the recording again, and the voice is not the same. She actually sounds like her, but she's fake. She's so fake. I don't know what else I can do. There was a smell of death in that damn forest, everywhere. Please. I hope that wasn't Sam. And I keep hearing that damn voice. I can hear it now, outside. I'm going out there with a .357 Magnum, and I'll kill anybody that did this. The consequences will be, holy shit. What the fuck? This isn't... What the fuck is this? Sam's dead. It's gotta be her. And I'm sitting in here like a fucking coward. The doors are boarded up, the windows too. I saw a big deer thing yesterday, but it wasn't a damn deer. It was huge, 7, 8 feet tall, lanky, and the smell, damn the smell. It was awful. I spent the last day reading and came across something called a wendigo. An old Native American legend says it has an insatiable hunger, but it couldn't have been a wendigo that night. I saw a person, I know it. It had to be. They came back last night. I heard them call my name and try to imitate my wife. My poor wife. We should have stayed home. Wendigos can't look like people. They can sound like people, but they can't look like people. What the hell was that? I've come across shapeshifters before too. From what I know, they can't perfectly copy whatever they want to imitate, which could explain the strange movements and the disfigured face. But that must be an illusion, right? But the wendigo shouldn't exist either. Besides, shapeshifters would surely imitate more than just one thing, wouldn't they? Not just one. The animals. The animals I kept seeing running through the garden were all deformed, too. Oh, shit. Drizzle falls lightly on the leaves around us. The smell of pine in the air as we, my grandfather and I, creep through the undergrowth. I run my tongue over my teeth and focus. I raise the rifle a little higher. A Nosler. A gun of a much higher quality than I should be using. This thing is wasted on me. I'm a pathetic hunter. I'm not even sure I'm okay with it, to be honest. With hunting, I mean, ethically. My grandpa and I basically eat everything we kill, and to be honest, I don't kill very much. A lot of my shots are intentional misses. I only do it to spend time with him. He's a fascinating man, and the guy likes to take me into the woods, so I just go along with it, that's fine. It's good time that I luckily have, but we are stalking a pair of deer right now. Big animals, too. I'm pretty sure the animals know we're here, but you can get surprisingly close, provided you don't really give any sign that you're trying to shoot them. "Stay down, Robbie," he mutters with his mouth half open. "Go around the bush on the right, then you have a clean shot. Shoot when you're ready." I like my name. It was named after the man next to me, as luck would have it. Robert. He is Robert the First, and I am, of course, Robert the Second. I nod and sneak into position. taking careful aim as instructed. I see a thumbs up out of the corner of my eye and fire. I miss. The shot echoes through the forest and birds fly up from a nearby tree. The deer turn in panic and try to flee. "Damn it," my grandpa mutters, rising from behind the bush, taking his rifle and firing a quick shot. My ego is somewhat soothed by the fact that he also misses, and we both watch as the deer disappear into the undergrowth and the shade of the forest. The man lowers his gun and looks at me. I do the same and shrug. We make eye contact for a second, then he breaks into a chuckle and shakes his head. "Damn it, Robbie. Every time I think I've taught you something, you manage to make a spectacular mistake like that. Hey, well, you know what they say. You can't judge a fish by whether it can climb a tree." I don't judge you on your ability to climb trees. You're my grandson. I judge you on your ability to swim, fishy. I point to the broken branch that my grandpa caused when he fired his shot. I really am learning from the best. "Bastard," he snorts, laughing and patting me on the chest. "Come on, let's track them. There's still plenty of daylight left." We sneak around the bushes and go through the small clearing, step over a fallen log, and follow the route the deer have taken. But suddenly, my grandfather stops, raises his hand and tilts his head to one side. I stop too, wait, hold my breath and listen carefully. My ears pick up the rustling of leaves and the cracking of twigs. It gets louder and comes towards us, exactly in the direction from which the deer fled. "Jesus," my grandpa grunts. "They're coming back here. They must have seen something." But he is interrupted by the sudden appearance of the deer through the bushes in front of us. It storms towards us directly out of the green, gloomy shadow. "Shit!" I yell, panicking. The deer doesn't try to go around us, but instead runs straight for our position. I raise the rifle and take aim quickly, trembling. "Damn it, Steve, get down!" Granddad yells, grabbing me by the sleeve and pulling me to the forest floor, back behind the log. "Steve?" I gasp as I fall to the ground with my grandpa, the deer bounding over us. My grandpa immediately takes up position, cocks and aims his own rifle over the log, deadly focused. Something must have spooked them. They saw a wolf or a bear. A wolf? A bear? I'd be surprised if I saw either of them at this time of day, but like I said, something made them flee. My grandfather remains calm and collected, pointing the barrel of his rifle at the damaged forest in front of us and along the deer crossing. I stay close to him, keeping watch in all directions, in case we are attacked from the side, with my gun cocked and my heart pounding. But nothing happens. We wait for a tense minute, then another, our muscles aching with tension because we are simply just holding ourselves in a preparatory position. But as I said, nothing comes towards us. My grandpa gets up carefully. "Strange," he mutters. "We'd better get out of here. Come on, stay alert, but let's go." I nod in response, and together we quickly but carefully leave the small grove, going back through the forest and following our tracks. After we've hopefully reached a safe distance, I ask my grandpa a question. "Why did you call me Steve back then?" "Eh? When the deer came up to me, you called me Steve. You said, 'Steve, get down there.'" "Oh yeah, really?" my grandpa asks, scratching his chin. "I don't know. But you know Steve, right? An old friend of mine. I swear I've mentioned him before, I think." Yes, maybe, once or twice." Grandpa shakes his head. "I've definitely mentioned him more than once. You probably weren't listening." He sighs. "It was just the moment, I guess. The way you were standing, the deer coming right at you, you raising your rifle. What would have happened if you had shot one? It would have come straight at you and struck you down with it. I don't know, it wasn't that big. It was bigger than you think. And at that speed, it would have knocked you over. That's what I told Steve all those years ago. He did exactly the same. The idiot. What's he doing these days? My grandpa doesn't answer. He just looks into the depths of the forest. We are on a high hill, and the trees reveal a deep green valley. The sky above us is gray. The man shakes his head and pretends to nod. Steve isn't around much anymore. Oh, I'm sorry, he's not dead, is he? My grandpa grimaces. I don't know for sure. You don't know? Look, forget it, kid. That's a story for another day. Let's just go back to the campsite. We can cook the rabbit we caught earlier. He pauses, reaches out his hand, and I immediately stop and follow his gaze. I hadn't even noticed it, but now that I see it, it sends a cold shiver down my spine. Just the memory of it makes me shudder. We are standing just a few meters away from a deer. It's the same deer as before, I'm sure of it. Neither of us had noticed it because the animal is standing completely still. Like a statue, almost like a stuffed animal. What the hell? Grandpa whispers, staring in surprise at the animal. He squints his eyes and then leans over to me. It's breathing, but very weakly. Look at its chest. I do so and take in the spectacle. The deer has placed one hoof against the trunk of a tree, which in itself is quite strange. But the animal is not moving, not even a little. It is not blinking. Hey, my grandpa barks, then louder, hey! He claps his hands, but the deer doesn't react. Then, in time with a sudden swirl of water from the rain-soaked leaves above us, the deer slowly turns its head. All around, until it stares at my grandfather and me, one eye on each of us. My stomach sinks, although I'm not sure why. The deer is, I don't know, something's wrong. The animal must be sick, my grandfather mutters. We'll take a different route back, going well past this creature. We're already too close. Yes, I mutter, and we both sneak away through the undergrowth, taking a new direction, while the deer watches us, deathly silent. I tremble as it finally disappears out of sight and is lost to us in the watery green shadows of the forest. Later that evening, after we have returned to camp and prepared and eaten our catch, I say goodnight to my grandpa and crawl into my tent, closing the flaps behind me. I grope around in the semi-darkness for a while, my flashlight casting intense black shadows in all directions as I move it from one spot to another to dig into my sleeping bag. It doesn't feel particularly cold right now, but the temperature can suddenly drop at any time, and I don't want to wake up stiff and frozen at 3 a.m. That doesn't happen to me. I wake up at 3:15 a.m., not frozen to death, but drenched in sweat. Roused from my dreamless sleep, I perk up my ears when I hear a rustling and sniffing outside, right next to my tent. I hold my breath and clench my teeth. It's that fear of the unknown that grips me. It's probably just a rabbit or hare, but the possibility that it could be something bigger, something more dangerous, is not something that can be ignored. For some reason, I don't think bear, mountain lion, or anything of the sort. I think deer. It's frozen. With unblinking eyes and turning head, it watches as my grandpa and I walk by. Something presses against the tent right next to my head. I jump and stare through the darkness at the bulging material. I try not to think about the fact that only a few thin, delicate panels of fabric separate me from the animals of the forest. Just ignore it, I tell myself. Ignore it, and it will go away. I quietly roll over onto my other side and squint my eyes, determined to be a man and not let the presence of a raccoon or squirrel scare me. The animal sniffs around a bit more, rustling in the grass in the darkness. My heartbeat quickens as I hear the thing scraping against the outer lining of the tent. And then, for a second, it stops altogether, and to my horror I hear my grandfather's voice. It's breathing, but only very weakly. The sentence comes through clearly and distinctly through the general rushing and the backwind of the forest. The sentence is completely without rhythm. It's like it's being read from a book by someone who never learned English. "Look at his chest," the voice says. "I'm panicking and don't know what to do. Outside is my grandpa playing a prank on me. That's got to be it. It has to be. Because there is literally no other explanation that makes sense. Never mind the fact that this is completely uncharacteristic. Never mind the fact that I've never heard the man speak like this in his entire life, not even in jest. He must be sleepwalking, that's it. My racing heartbeat slows down a little, that's it. It's the only possible explanation that makes sense, and if that's the case, I can't just let him wander around outside." Despite my fear, I carefully struggle out of my sleeping bag. People may think I'm an idiot, but if my grandfather wanders around dazed in the forest, he could get lost or seriously injured. So I push aside my irrational fear and reach for the zipper with a trembling hand, opening it with a much too loud sound. Screw it. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to go all the way. I rip open the zipper, then the next one, and stick my head out into the night as the cool air caresses my face, while I raise the lantern to drive away the darkness. What I see is nothing. I jump out of the tent, stare, and raise the lantern as the light falls on the long grasses and the nearby trees. We are still on the ridge of the valley, but the valley itself is shrouded in darkness. A small part of the visible moon illuminates the outermost tips of the trees in silver, but I am too busy to properly appreciate the natural beauty at the moment. I walk around the tent in circles and see no trace of my grandfather. "Grandpa?" I call out into the night, turn around and hold up the lantern. Still nothing. Something chirps softly from the branches of the deep forest. I turn around with a dry throat, but the trees don't give away any secrets. I cross the grass and crouch down next to my grandpa's tent. The zipper stays closed. "Grandpa?" I whisper, but he doesn't answer. I try again, a little louder. "Grandpa?" I hear a groan and grumble from the tent. "Huh?" I hear him mumble. Then, "What the hell?" "Grandpa, are you okay?" "Of course I'm fine. What's wrong with you?" "All right." "Nothing. See you tomorrow." He mumbles something to himself, and I hear him turning over in his sleeping bag. I sit up and stare out into the night. The chirping sounds again from the branches, and I hurry back to my tent, zip up the zipper tightly and securely, and try to force myself back to sleep, trembling. It takes a long time, and I don't remember falling asleep. My dreams are disturbing, and mostly consist of discovering that something has crept into my tent, dream distorted and distorted to an impossible size. My dream self crawls from place to place, as a nightmare glides and swims through the shadows like water. It is a welcome relief when I wake up safe and sound, the faded morning light filtering through the tent shining on my face. "Ugh," I mutter, sitting up straight and rubbing my eyes in a daze. For a second or two, last night's reality blurs with dreams, but as I remember the truth, that bitterly familiar fear returns. I climb out of the tent into the warming morning air and see my grandpa washing his face in a pot of water. "Morning," he grunts. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Not so good, to be honest," I reply. "You were sleepwalking last night." "Eh?" Grandpa looks up at me but continues with his routine. "No, I don't sleepwalk. You were mumbling nonsense and banging on my tent at 3 in the morning, I tell him. "I came to check on you, but you must have just gone back to bed." My grandpa pauses and looks at me directly. "So that really happened. You disturbed me. I thought I dreamt it." He gets up and scratches his chin. "Tell me exactly what happened." I tell the story, and my grandpa is silent until the end. He looks around our surroundings a little pale and looks down into the valley. I fucking knew it, he mutters, almost inaudibly. It's the same place. Exactly the same place. What? I ask him. What do you mean? I was here once with Steve. I knew I had been here before. I thought I had chosen the place pretty randomly, but my subconscious must have had other ideas. Grandpa, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. He stares across the valley and I follow his gaze. We watch as a small flock of dark birds fly in circles above the trees. Again, and again, and again, they fly around in circles. He turns to me and looks at me with a grim expression on his face. Maybe even a little afraid. And that worries me deeply. Nothing should scare this man. Pack up, Robbie. Take care and hurry up. We're getting out of here. In a different atmosphere, I might have asked him. But the mood is clear. I immediately do as he says, and in silence we quickly pack up our things and load our backpacks, glancing furtively at the trees. The forest has dried out a bit since yesterday's rain, but the sky above us is still gray. We make our way into this gloom, thoroughly blurring every trace of our modest campsite. My grandpa walks a little faster than usual. Fern and pine needles crunch under his feet as he strides through the forest. He also holds his rifle a little tighter. I break the tension. Grandpa, what the hell is going on? What aren't you telling me? I've been an idiot before, Grandpa replies, as a breeze whistles through the branches of the trees. And I've lost a good friend. I won't let the same thing happen to you. We make our way through the bushes and pass a large pond surrounded by dense, tangled weeds. I take a look at the water. It is a murky gray-green, covered with strange floating moss. The surface is broken by the heads of 3 deer, standing perfectly still. Their bodies are completely submerged below their necks, and they stare at us as we pass. On any other day I might have found this sight quite amusing, but right now I feel nothing but cold, gnawing fear. One of the deer rises out of the water, which splashes softly, rears up on its hind legs, and my grandfather grabs me by the sleeve and pulls me with him. Don't stop moving. We're getting out of here. Just keep walking, Robbie. Our steps quicken, our breathing gets a little heavier. The trees rush past us, branches scratch my arms and face. We come to a clearing, and my grandpa stops immediately. What is it? I ask, panting. Something moves in the shadows of the trees and flits between the branches on the opposite side of the clearing. The hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I instinctively raise my rifle. The sounds of the birds and the wind fall silent, and the air itself seems to darken as the moving shadow in front of me comes closer. It's difficult, almost impossible to make out its exact shape through the layers of branches and leaves. But I swear, I can make out a rough, vaguely humanoid silhouette among the shadows and the dark, green-tinted spot. "Did you come back for me, Robert?" whispers a voice. My muscles tense in response to my name. Is it my name she's speaking? Or my grandpa's? My grandpa draws in a little air through his teeth. He begins to cautiously make a circle around the clearing, and I imitate his movements. "You wouldn't leave me behind again, would you?" The voice is not unlike the one I heard last night. It is different, but the rhythm, or lack thereof, is quite similar. My grandpa lifts the rifle, cocks it, but he doesn't shoot. "Keep walking around, child," he says to me. "To the left, go through that part of the clearing there. I'm right behind you." I start to creep around the clearing, without letting go of the shadow in the trees directly in front of me. I try so hard to concentrate on it, to understand what I see, but I can't. The branches themselves seem to move, crackling and curling in the shadow. The figure suddenly takes a step forward. "Run!" my grandpa shouts, raising the rifle and firing a loud shot into the air. Unprepared for such sudden noise, my ears ring as I scramble and stumble through the forest. Along a natural path between the trees, until I finally come to a stop when I realize that my grandpa is not behind me. He told me to run, but should I turn back for him, I have to, that's for sure. So I turn around and prepare to rush back to the clearing when the man himself staggers through the bushes towards me, his face pale as chalk. "Get that damn thing out of my face, you idiot," he grunts as she pushes away the barrel of my rifle, and together we run through the forest. My grandpa drops his backpack and I do the same. We leave the equipment behind as we run through the undergrowth back to where we recently parked the truck. When we finally see it waiting for us at the side of a dirt road, we jump in and my grandpa puts the key in the ignition and turns it with a clunk, starting the engine. The wheels spin and we drive off, back through the wilderness on the long back roads of the woods. After a while, and once the air has cooled, I pluck up the courage to ask my grandpa what he saw. What happened after he fired the rifle? That thing tried to talk to me again. The deep woods, Robbie. I'm sorry I took you there. Those places can rob a man of his mind. Real bad. But there was something, wasn't there? Something real. Yes, I think there was. Was it? I stammer. Who was it, Grandpa? A nightmare, that's all. Something that shouldn't exist by any laws of nature. His voice? Did you recognize the voice? You said you heard something outside your tent last night, right? I nod. Did it sound like me? Yes, I reply, but it wasn't me, was it? No, I reply. No, it wasn't me. Sometimes we hear voices. It doesn't mean they belong to someone. Then why didn't you shoot it? What? His hands move and grip the steering wheel. You fired the rifle, but you aimed it into the air, not at the shadow. Why did you do that? My grandpa doesn't have an answer to that. He just extends his hand to pat me on the shoulder, and as the clouds swirl overhead, we spend the rest of the long drive home in thoughtful silence. Silence with occasional glances at the thicket of trees passing by. It all begins on an autumn night long ago, when the wind whispered through the towering pines like restless spirits, and the inky black of the sky swallowed every star. Back in 1949, a young man named Arthur Reynolds had taken up his first real job working in the vast forested outskirts of Manistee, Michigan. Arthur, an eager, no-nonsense outdoorsman with a weathered look and eyes that held both wonder and caution, had spent his early years drifting between sporadic logging jobs before finally being employed by the Forest Service. With a steady, low hum of forest machinery and the rustle of cedar and pine as his only companions, Arthur found solace in the remote wilderness. Night after night, as he and his crew ventured deeper into the shadowy land, there was a raw, almost palpable energy. A sense that the forest was alive with more than just fauna and flora, that it guarded its mysteries jealously. One evening, after spending long hours at a local bar in the small, tight-knit town near Manistee, Arthur set out on the narrow, winding road in his old pickup truck. The road was bordered by dense stands of pine that bent violently in the wind, their branches thrashing against each other as if engaged in a silent, furious debate. The thick canopy overhead and the angry storm clouds that cloaked the heavens ensured there was no sign of the moon or stars, only the narrow beams of his headlights penetrating the gloom. It wasn't until a few minutes into his drive that something out of the corner of his eye momentarily seized his attention. A massive, shadowy figure leaped so suddenly onto the road that his heart nearly stopped. For an instant, his mind processed the shape. A hulking, dog-like silhouette with proportions that defied natural explanation. It bounded across the asphalt with a single, astonishing leap, its form stretching nearly the entire width of the road. In that heart-stopping moment, all the stories of gigantic timber wolves Arthur had dismissed as local lore flashed before his eyes. The creature's unnatural size and speed sent a chill coursing through his veins, and yet, as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished into the dark embrace of the forest, leaving behind an eerie silence that roared louder than the storm. Arthur pressed on, his hands gripping the wheel so tight he feared they might shatter, and in the back of his mind a deep unease began to take root. A sense that the forest was not only a place of peace, but also of unspeakable horror. Days later, an inexplicable tension gripped the entire community. On a cold, windless October night, the kind when the temperature dipped around 40 degrees and each breath seemed to fog in the air, residents in a small settlement on the outskirts of Manistee were rudely awakened from sleep by an unholy clamor. Arthur's neighbor at a little wooden house in a cluster of 7 homesteads reported hearing persistent scraping and clanging sounds coming from the front yard. It sounded as though some monstrous force was clawing persistently on metal, trying to tear its way inside. The steady, ominous rhythm of these noises resonated far too deliberately to be the work of a stray animal or even a determined raccoon. Compelled by equal parts bravery and dread, Arthur, then residing in a modest home on a vast property, decided to investigate. After slipping into his old worn boots and clutching a trusty flashlight, he stepped out into the pitch-black night. The only hint of light came from a solitary porch lamp at the neighbor's house, which barely illuminated the grotesque scene that lay beyond. Before Arthur's widening eyes, 3 gargantuan dogs materialized at the edge of the neighbor's yard. Each dog was unlike any creature he had ever seen, standing nearly 2 meters tall on all fours, with elongated limbs that reached impossibly high up toward the roof of the house. Each animal's shaggy jet-black fur absorbed what little light there was, leaving only a ghostly outline. Their fierce eyes glowed in the dim light as they clawed and scratched at the wall of the neighboring home with powerful, deliberate strikes, each scratch leaving a deep gouge as if the dogs were trying to etch their presence into the very fabric of the house. Yet, instead of a desperate attempt at forced entry, the horrifying display felt strangely deliberate, almost as if they were trying to lure someone out. Arthur's pulse hammered in his ears as he watched the creatures. They paused, their piercing stares seemingly locking onto him from a distance of 50 yards. When they turned toward his direction, a dreadful realization gripped him. These beings did not move on 4 legs, as natural creatures did, but rather reared up, assuming a bipedal stance that towered over him at nearly 7 feet tall. In that surreal moment, the world tilted. The boundary between reality and nightmare blurred as these monstrous figures unleashed guttural, inhuman sounds, a tortured combination of howls and screams that seemed to tear at the very soul. In the following days, the events of that night grew into something of a local legend. Arthur, burdened by the weight of what he had witnessed, discussed the episode with his co-workers and even with the local police. Radio transmissions from the Manistee precinct began to capture snippets of frantic reports, and officers described sounding distorted chatter over the airwaves. Unit 12, be advised. Possible large canid. Repeat, not a wolf. Approaching high bipedal. Request immediate backup. The official report, filed meticulously by Sergeant Michael Bryant, whose procedural habit was as rigorous as his skepticism, recorded every nuance of Arthur's description. Bryant noted the unusual height and posture of the creatures, their strangely coordinated behavior, and the unnerving silence that fell over the area after the beasts had passed. Yet, despite multiple surveys of the accident scene and surrounding woods, no trace remained of the gargantuan interlopers beyond a few indents pressed into mud near the roadside, a discovery that deepened the mystery rather than resolving it. It wasn't long before rumors spread amongst the locals. Over hushed conversations at the local diner and in faded wooden porches along the main street of Manistee, other eerie details emerged. An elderly couple from a nearby farmhouse recalled hearing similar unearthly sounds on more than one occasion. They spoke of shadowy figures slinking through the underbrush and eyes that glowed with unnatural intensity. Some residents even claimed that the very land itself seemed to recoil from something ancient and vengeful that now roamed the forests, a predator not wholly of this world. The incident rattled the community profoundly. Old superstitions were rekindled, and whispered warnings not to wander the woods after dark took on a terrifying new urgency. Friends and families huddled together, straining their ears for the slightest hint of that chilling half-heard cry, a cry that had imprinted itself indelibly on the minds of those living on the edge of the trees. In quieter moments later on, while poring over yellowed Forest Service reports and grainy black and white photographs of enormous padded footprints discovered near a mud pool beside the road, Arthur would recall how, with trembling hands, he had tried to record the sounds on his portable reel-to-reel tape recorder, a device far too primitive for the unearthly timbre of the beast's calls. He would listen, long into the early hours of the morning, to the distorted audio that seemed to oscillate between the sounds of a wild howl and a pleading cry, as if the creature itself were caught between realms. His recollections grew ever more detailed and intensely disturbing with each retelling. He described every minute detail: the slick sheen of black fur beneath the beam of his dying flashlight, the low rumble of the wind as it swept past ancient trees, and the almost tangible sense of being watched by entities that should have remained forever hidden. And yet, for all his methodical documentation, a residual question remained. How could something so majestic and terrifying exist within these ancient woods? As the days turned into weeks and weeks into years, Arthur's encounters intertwined with the broader tapestry of life in the Manistee region. His experience would later be echoed by others who remembered their own inexplicable encounters on lonely nights along the forest roads. Neighbors, reluctant to speak directly of what they'd witnessed, would sometimes leave notes on doorsteps or brief messages on police reports, cryptic accounts that hinted at a presence lurking on the periphery of human settlement, a presence that defied explanation by normal standards of wildlife behavior. The cold, sober tone of police transcripts and the hushed urgency of radio messages were at odds with the incredulity of local eyewitnesses who swore on their lives that the forest held secrets far darker than a simple animal attack. In whispered conversations around creaking firesides among friends and kin, the accounts meshed into an ever-growing legend. A legend that seemed as much a part of the land as the ancient trees themselves, passed from one generation to the next like a warning from beyond. That old legend, with its mix of wonder and terror, would soon prove to be far more than a mere campfire story. The following autumn saw the cautious return of those accused of having seen the uncanny in the depths of the wilderness. Arthur, now older and marked by an internal melancholy born of many restless nights, found himself haunted not only by the memory of that first inexplicable encounter, but also by a deeper, metaphysical question: who or what was responsible for these manifestations? In a rare moment of vulnerability, during a conversation with his estranged friend, Officer Daniel Ramirez from the Manistee Police Department, Arthur confessed that in the long hours spent alone in the forest, listening to the mournful sigh of the pines, he began to wonder if the forest was alive, sensing the pain and burden of those who had strayed too far from home. Daniel, a pragmatic man with a background in both law enforcement and local history, recalled a series of grim radio dispatches from night patrols, messages laced with disbelief and an undertone of superstition. There's something out there, a thing that shouldn't be. These snippets of recorded panic resonated with Arthur's own recollections, even as the official narrative of the incident remained forever mired in ambiguity. In the small-town archives of Manistee, amidst faded photographs and decades-old case files, hints emerged suggesting that the phenomenon might not be isolated to a single night or a single observer. Forest Service records showed repeated incidents of unusual wildlife behavior spanning several autumns, though the government was reluctant to confirm or deny the reports outright. A pattern was emerging: unexplained animal tracks, bizarre radio intercepts of disjointed howls recorded by forest rangers during routine patrols, and even an isolated report of a man's radio transmission fading in and out with a sound that resembled almost human sighs. The atmosphere of the region grew thick with suspicion and dread, a palpable electricity that would drive even the most stalwart soul to double-check every window at night. For Arthur, these details were more than cold data points. They were a reminder of a force as old as the forest itself, one that had chosen to reveal its terrifying presence at the most unsuspecting moments. Over the years, in family gatherings at the old homestead, Arthur's vivid recounting of those nights was interspersed with quiet laughter masking a shared anxiety. In hushed tones, his daughter Eleanor and her younger brother would recall the nerve-wracking tales that had been passed down like a sacred warning. "It wasn't just the look in their eyes," Arthur would say in his gravelly voice, his eyes narrowing as if reliving that fateful night over and over. It was the feeling that they were waiting, always waiting, for someone to listen. And as the living room grew darker with every setting sun, the line between memory and present reality began to blur. The legends of monstrous creatures, the spectral howls in the silence of the falling snow, and the inexplicable appearances of shadowed figures in roadside photographs all wove together into an unshakable truth. The woods held secrets that no one could safely speak of, not even to themselves. In that era of uncertainty and whispered mysteries, the forest around Manistee became a silent guardian of a terrible enigma. Arthur's own life turned into a mosaic of restless nights and haunted days, where each creak of the floorboards in his modest home, or each distant rustle beyond the glass window conjured images of those towering, bipedal dogs, and the feeling that he too might one day be drawn into a reality where legends and nightmares merged, leaving him unable to tell if what he recalled was memory or malignant invention. And as the seasons turned and the town clung desperately to its ordinary routines, the evidence of Arthur's encounter, the police reports, and even the faded, almost illegible notes in the archives all promised that something dark had stepped beyond the threshold of folklore and into the very fabric of everyday life. A quiet, simmering tension had now settled over Manistee, a tension that would only deepen as the whispers of the woods grew louder with the passage of time. Years later, the memory of that harrowing autumn morphed into an obsession that drove Arthur further into the recesses of the forest and into increasingly dangerous investigations. Even after his retirement from the Forest Service, Arthur continued to frequent the deep, secluded corners of the woodland, armed with little more than a flashlight, an old radio scanner, and a notebook filled with hasty observations scrawled in spidery handwriting. In these solitary excursions, every rustling leaf and distant crack of a branch felt like a prelude to something monstrous. In the crisp silence of a Michigan winter, Arthur would sometimes find himself half convinced that the very trees were breathing, exhaling memories of centuries past. He could hear the sound of labored breathing in the wind, almost as if an unseen sentinel stirred behind every cluster of firs. During one of these long, isolating nights, as frost delicately crept up the bark of ancient trees and the moon's light struggled to fight the dark, Arthur made his most perplexing discovery yet. Deep within an overgrown copse near the edge of the forest, he stumbled upon an abandoned campsite that appeared to have been hastily deserted. A scattering of rusty tools and a cold, half-buried thermos hinted at the hurried exit of someone who had witnessed something incomprehensible. Alongside these remnants, Arthur found a set of peculiar tracks etched into the moist earth, a series of prints that were too large and oddly arranged to be the work of any known animal. They bore the unmistakable imprint of something with a human-like stride, yet with the massive proportions of a beast. Arthur knelt beside the prints, his breath fogging the cold air, and scribbled furiously in his notebook as the significance of the discovery sank in. He radioed the local authorities. "This is Patrolman Harris. I've encountered unusual tracks near Old Miller's Trail. They defy description. Request immediate assistance on location." The static of the response was punctuated by a terse order. "Copy, Patrolman Harris. Backup en route." This wasn't the first time that Arthur's radio had crackled with such urgent tones, and as he waited in the forlorn silence, memories of other unspeakable nights came flooding back. He remembered the wild, distorted, canine-like howls that had once echoed through the trees. He recalled his own shaking voice as he reported the mysterious figures outside the neighbor's house. And he wondered, with a growing dread, whether these disparate incidents were threads of a larger, more sinister tapestry woven into the history of Manastee's wilderness. His own radio, an aging piece of military surplus tuned to various frequencies, now carried the weight of unexplained mysteries. Through it, Arthur began to intercept fragmented transmissions that didn't seem to belong to any official channel. Snatches of voices, half-whispered confessions, and bursts of static-laced urgency that mentioned strange sightings, unexplained disappearances, and bizarre gatherings in the deep woods. "Do not approach. Stay out. They come with the twilight." One transmission crackled, its ominous message hanging like a curse in the frigid air. Haunted by these encounters, Arthur found himself drawn into a labyrinth of folklore and fragmented reports, each one painting a vivid picture of a wilderness that was no longer a benign guardian, but rather a keeper of ancient, unyielding horrors. His nightly patrols grew bolder, each step taking him further from the sanity of daylight and deeper into realms where the past and present converged. In one heart-stopping moment under a sky heavy with clouds, Arthur encountered a clearing he had never seen before, a place where the trees grew so thickly that daylight was a mere memory. In the center of the clearing lay a circle of stones, worn smooth by time, arranged almost ritualistically. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and something metallic. As he stepped closer, his heart hammered in his chest, and he heard it clearly, as if whispered by the forest itself. A low, mournful sound that resembled a collective sigh, laden with the centuries of sorrow and anger. Had these stones once marked a forgotten burial site or a place of tribal rites? Arthur couldn't be sure, but in that fleeting moment, he felt as though the land was speaking directly to him. A direct communion that threatened to shatter the fragile barrier between memory and nightmare. Haunted by what he had found, Arthur began to compile all of these oddities into what he hoped would be a comprehensive record of the inexplicable events encircling Manastee. He spent countless nights under the harsh glare of a solitary desk lamp, transcribing rough sketches of tracks, recording the unusual patterns of radio chatter, and documenting the shifting details of his encounters. His home, once a sanctuary of warm memories, now became a shrine to the mysteries of the forest. A repository of faded photographs, yellowed notes, and relics of a reality that refused to yield to simple explanations. His daughter, Eleanor, ever the voice of reason tempered by love, urged him to let go of these investigations, to allow the ghosts of the past to rest. But Arthur could not. He was certain that these spectral occurrences were not isolated to the margins of human comprehension. They were the manifestations of something primal, something that had long lurked in the darkness before humanity ever walked these lands, and that now, with each unexplained howl and each ghostly footprint, was reasserting its presence. In the following years, as word of Arthur's discoveries reached the small circles of local historians, paranormal investigators, and even a few unsanctioned wildlife experts, a subtle yet pervasive shift began to occur in the community. There were hushed conversations in diners, furtive glances exchanged on the quiet main street of Manistee, and a growing reluctance to venture out after sunset. All the while, the forest, dense and unyielding, held its secrets tight within its silent heart, a living, breathing enigma that defied the tidy narratives of man. And though Arthur never received a definitive answer from the authorities about his bizarre findings, his recordings, sketches, and meticulous accounts soon formed the crux of an urban legend that would persist for decades. Every time the wind stirred the leaves, every time a distant howl disrupted the silence of the midnight hour, those who knew of Arthur's legacy felt a shudder of recognition, as if the past were reaching out to remind them that some mysteries should never be solved. The relentless quest for truth in the face of an unknowable horror drove Arthur deeper into the forbidden recesses of the forest, and with it, the burden of knowledge began to take its toll on his sanity. Even as he grew older and his steps became slower, the forest continued to beckon, a siren call that promised both revelation and ruination. Late one fog-shrouded night, his aged eyes caught a fleeting glimpse of something even more macabre than he had ever imagined. The unmistakable silhouette of a figure standing in the middle of a moonlit clearing. Its form unnaturally tall, draped in what seemed to be rags and entwined with the branches of gnarled trees. In that moment, standing transfixed amid the quiet terror of the woods, Arthur realized that the mysteries of Manistee were far from being mere relics of old lore. They were evolving, and the line between man and myth was dissolving into something altogether more disturbing. As the cycle of seasons turned, the grip of these dark events tightened like a noose around the heart of Manistee. The once quiet town, known for its picturesque landscapes and gentle small-town rhythms, was now marked by an undercurrent of dread. Neighbors no longer casually strolled along the main street after dark, and even daytime activities carried the residue of fear. The local authorities, forced to confront a mounting number of bizarre incidents, began to treat every report, no matter how mundane, with an air of grave suspicion. Sergeant Michael Bryant, who had long managed the forest patrols with a cool pragmatism, found himself increasingly troubled by reports that defied all logic. On one particularly cold morning, as a thick fog rolled across the streets of Manistee, Bryant was reviewing a series of radio dispatches when a voice crackled over the radio, trembling with urgency. "This is dispatch. All units, be advised. Sighting in progress near Northwood Estates. Unidentified creature, approximate height 7 feet. Repeat, 7 feet." The message was punctuated by static, leaving Bryant with a lingering sense of unease. He mobilized a small team, instructing them in precise police procedure. Set up perimeters, record every observation, and report any anomalies without delay. For Bryant, every oddity, no matter how small, was a potential clue in a case that defied the rules of normalcy. Simultaneously, Eleanor, Arthur's daughter, who had grown up on her father's fervent tales, felt a familial duty to carry on what she now regarded as a sacred search for truth. Armed with her own journal and a battered tape recorder that once belonged to her father, she began her inquiries into the dark whispers of the forest. Her journey took her from the local police station, where she pored over faded copies of case reports, to the dilapidated archives of the nearby Historical Society, and even to the isolated farms on the outskirts of town, where elderly residents clung to fragments of memory. In hushed conversations over steaming cups of coffee at the Cornerstone Cafe, residents recounted the same disjointed stories of vehicles encountering mysterious silhouettes on deserted roads, of unnatural sounds that split the stillness of night, and of urgent, crackling radio transmissions that hinted at a presence that transcended ordinary life. One particularly memorable account came from a reclusive hunter named Raymond Ray Dalrymple, whose gruff voice softened as he described a midnight encounter on a frosty October evening. "I was out tracking a deer," Ray recalled slowly, his eyes darkened by both age and sorrow, "when I heard a sound like a woman's wail mingled with the growl of a beast. I turned round, and there, standing in the clearing, was a creature so tall and gaunt, its eyes glowed red in the half-light. I tell you, that ain't something you ever forget." Ray's words, repeated in many variations over countless nights, only deepened the town's collective anxiety and lent a chilling realism to the idea that the forest's dark inhabitants were more than just figments of overactive imaginations. Amidst this creeping terror, the Manistee Police Department began to consider the possibility that these strange occurrences were part of a coordinated phenomenon rather than isolated oddities. Officers reported that their patrol radios picked up intermittent messages containing phrases that seemed to echo from some primordial source. Words like return, vengeance, and the old ones. While no definitive explanation could be found in any modern log or forensic test, these radio communications were scrutinized by experts who noted that the modulated frequencies bore uncanny resemblance to signals once intercepted from long-abandoned military experiments. Had someone or something reactivated an ancient network of clandestine transmissions? Or was the forest itself channeling a primordial voice from a time before man had set foot on its soil? The investigation into these transmissions became a covert project within the department, a puzzle that had no immediate solution, but whose every new twist only further undermined the veneer of normality that had once defined this sleepy town. As the autumn days bled into bitter winter nights, Eleanor found herself increasingly drawn into the enigma, driven by both love for her father's legacy and a personal need for closure. She retraced his old steps, venturing into the forest with a sense of both dread and determination. On one frigid evening, when the wind moaned like a lost soul over a blanket of fresh snow, she discovered a hidden glade that Arthur had described in his rambling journal entries. The glade was circular, bordered by towering oak and pine trees that seemed to bow in silent testimony, and in its center lay a series of old weathered symbols etched into the frozen ground. They looked like ancient runes, scrawled by a hand no longer living yet, still potent with meaning. Eleanor knelt down, her breath swirling in front of her, and brushed away a thin layer of frost to reveal words that spoke of both protection and destruction. A cryptic message left behind for anyone who dared to know the forest's secrets. In that moment, as she stood alone in the echoing silence of the snow-draped glen, she felt that the forest was communicating with her. The message was subtle, a simple plea for recognition, but its implications were as vast and terrifying as the wooded realm itself. Eleanor's subsequent investigations did not come without risk. One late night, while combing through records at the town archives, she discovered an unmarked box containing photographs, handwritten letters, and even a battered radio recorder that once belonged to her father. The letters, penned in a spidery, desperate script, detailed encounters with the unearthly creatures, the hurried notes of disappearing witnesses, and fragmented accounts of ominous ceremonies held deep in the forest. Her hands shook as she read passages that recounted chilling dialogues between her father and unknown informants, transmissions that recorded frantic police calls, and descriptions of creatures so monstrous that even the most stoic officer had later admitted to feeling an inexplicable terror. Eleanor's discovery sent shockwaves through her core, fusing her academic curiosity with a visceral fear that the truth lay buried beneath layers of horror and time. The deeper she delved into her father's records, the more it became evident that the paranormal events were not random, but seemed to be orchestrated by a hidden force, one with roots that stretched back far longer than any living memory, linking the land, the people, and the persistent echoes of a darker past. Between the hushed talks over coffee and the secret meetings in abandoned barns on the outskirts of town, an unspoken consensus began to form among those who had seen or heard too much. The forest was not simply a backdrop for nature's quiet beauty, but a living chronicle of forgotten sins and spectral wanderers. Even as the Manistee authorities attempted to clamp down on rumors by insisting on rational explanations, the evidence, lost footprints, inexplicable recordings, cryptic symbols, continued to mount, defying the tidy narratives of modern science. And in the deep silence of winter, when every shadow grew long and every creak of an old house sparked heart-pounding terror, the forest exhaled a promise that was as mesmerizing as it was deadly. Something ancient and insatiable was stirring, and its awakening could mean the end of all that was familiar and safe. Time passed, yet the haunting revelations never ceased to fester. As spring's tentative warmth began to push through the lingering chill of winter, a palpable restlessness gripped Manistee. The accounts of abnormal sightings and eerie radio transmissions continued unabated, and a sense of collective foreboding resonated in every whispered conversation. Arthur, now long retired and bearing the scars of half a lifetime spent contending with unfathomable terrors, had retreated further into a solitary existence. Despite his physical frailty, his mind remained razor-sharp, a repository of memories that refused to fade with the passing years. In the quiet solitude of his modest living room, Arthur would sit for hours, staring out at the forested horizon, lost in the labyrinth of thoughts spurred by his encounters. His eyes, though tired, burned with an inner fire that belied his advanced age, as if he carried the burden of a secret that was as heavy as it was undeniable. Aware that his time was drawing to an end, he resolved to pass on every last detail to those who would listen, hoping that by preserving the truth, he might spare future generations from the unknown horrors that lurked in the murk beneath the trees. Late one evening in early May, as the remnants of winter still clung stubbornly to the ground and the first buds of green whispered of a new season, Arthur ventured out on what he would later describe as his final expedition. The forest, fresh with the scent of damp earth and blooming wildflowers, was not at all the menacing void of his past recollections. But Arthur knew that beneath its gentle surface lay a timeless darkness, waiting to reawaken. His goal that night was to reach an isolated clearing he had first seen decades ago, a place shrouded in legend and said to be the meeting ground for those spectral entities whispered about in the old stories. With his faithful radio scanner slung over his shoulder and an old leather-bound journal clutched tightly in hand, Arthur pushed deeper into the dense woodland. As he navigated the labyrinthine network of trails that only a seasoned forest ranger could decipher, he recorded every unusual sound with meticulous care. The rustling in the underbrush, the distant murmur of a breeze that seemed to speak in an ancient tongue, and the rhythmic tapping of his own boots upon the soft, moss-covered ground. During that solitary journey, Arthur encountered moments that defied explanation. At one point, deep in the enveloping darkness of a narrow glade, he heard what could only be described as a low, resonant hum, one that seemed to emanate from beneath the very roots of the towering trees. Stopping in his tracks, he knelt beside a cluster of gnarled oaks, his breath catching in his throat, as the hum intensified into what sounded like an ethereal chorus. Unable to determine its source, he recorded the incident on his portable tape recorder, his hands trembling as he pressed the record button. Somewhere in the distance, behind the dense barrier of foliage, a sharp, desperate cry echoed, a sound that seemed to merge human agony with the mournful wail of a beast. Arthur's heart pounded with a mix of terror and exhilaration, for he knew that he stood on the threshold of a truth that had long eluded him. Unbeknownst to him, as he recorded these strange phenomena, others were listening from afar. At the Manistee Police Department, Sergeant Bryant and Officer Ramirez convened in a dimly lit briefing room, their faces drawn and serious as they revisited the growing string of inexplicable incidents. Detailed reports, some of which had been intercepted via the hijacked frequencies on their old scanners, outlined similar encounters occurring across various parts of the vast haunted forest. Bryant's voice, steady yet laced with an undercurrent of dread, recited the details. Multiple witnesses have confirmed large bipedal figures near the old logging roads. There are consistent reports of bizarre vocalizations and unusual physical traces, bruises on trees, disrupted earth patterns, and more. The atmosphere in that room was oppressive, as if the truth itself weighed down every word uttered. Radar screens, once used primarily to monitor highway speeds, now flickered with cryptic data points that defied conventional explanation. To the officers there, it was as if the very fabric of nature had begun to unravel. Each new call, each clipped dispatch message, wove itself into an intricate tapestry of dread that left them with one unshakable question. Were these events merely the product of old superstitions, or was something far more sinister at play? As days bled into endless, tension-filled nights, Eleanor's investigations began to intersect with those of the police. Drawing from her father's extensive records and her own encounters in the forest, she met with local experts and even found herself in clandestine meetings with retired Forest Service personnel who had long left the service under unexplained circumstances. In a small, sparsely furnished room at the county station, she sat with a former colleague of her father's, a grizzled man named Robert Bob Jenkins, whose eyes darted nervously as he recalled his own brush with the inexplicable. "I remember one night," Bob said in a hushed tone, as if fearing that any louder discussion might awaken what slumbered in the woods, "when the radio went silent for exactly 3 minutes, and then I heard those damned howls, not like a wolf, more like a man, or something in between." His voice trembled as he added, "That night, I looked out the window and saw them, standing near the tree line, watching. It was as if they were waiting for something, or someone." Bob's account, corroborated by fragments of overheard dispatches and corroborative police logs, only deepened Eleanor's conviction that the forest was a living entity, a keeper of secrets that transcended the known laws of nature. Every discovery, every chilling detail etched into the collective memory of Manistee nudged the town further away from the reassurance of an everyday life. Eleanor began to publish her findings in a series of meticulous reports, hoping that by drawing public attention, the dark forces at work might be understood before they grew too powerful. She sent copies of transcripts and old photographs to local newspapers, and even managed to secure a late-night interview with an investigative reporter from a regional television station. During that interview, under the sterile glow of studio lights, she recounted in measured tones the grotesque details of her father's notebooks, the eerie radio transmissions, and the unexplained footprints etched in the frozen mud. Even as she spoke, the edge of her voice betrayed an underlying terror, a warning that some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. But as the investigation deepened, a growing pattern of inexplicable coincidences emerged. The very place where Arthur had recorded the hum, a clearing marked by ancient symbols and shrouded in mist, began to appear on numerous eyewitness accounts. Local residents reported flashes of movement in that same clearing on nights when the mist was thickest, and there were even claims that the ground itself seemed to pulse with an otherworldly rhythm. With each new report, the credibility of the bizarre events increased, blending the line between urban legend and undeniable reality. The forest, for all its rustic beauty, was becoming a theater of nightmares, and those who dared tread its depths were drawn into a drama whose script was written in screams and silence. Eleanor's own resolve wavered one foggy evening as she retraced her steps back from that very clearing, her tape recorder still humming with the residual static of distant voices. In the silence of the midnight wood, with every snap of a twig echoing like a bullet in the dark, she could almost hear her father's solemn admonition. Listen, and you might just hear the forest speak its final words. Each step became a prayer against the fear that the legends of Manistee might finally claim her as well. And even as she struggled to maintain her resolve, deep down a question gnawed at her heart. Was the forest's malevolent force simply a remnant of forgotten ancient rituals, or was it an active, ever-evolving threat poised to reclaim the land, and perhaps the souls of those who dared to uncover its secrets? In the final throes of that long, unsettling saga, when the line between myth and reality had blurred beyond recognition, the dark heart of Manistee revealed one last, shattering secret. It was a night in late September when the wind carried an almost imperceptible change in its tone. A whisper that seemed to unravel the very fabric of the known world. Eleanor, now deeply entwined with the chilling legacy of her father's pursuits, had returned to the now infamous clearing in the heart of the forest. The trees there loomed like ancient sentinels, their gnarled branches stretched out as if in a silent plea. The symbols carved into the earth had faded with time, yet the impression they left was indelible, a message lost in translation across generations. Standing in that hallowed space, Eleanor felt the weight of all that had come before her. The ghostly transmissions, the monstrous apparitions, the whispered warnings of local farmers and reclusive hunters alike. And with each pulsating beat of her heart, she knew that the forest was not done revealing its secrets. That night, as a thick, impenetrable mist rolled in, Eleanor set up a small recording station near the center of the clearing. Her voice, steady yet haunted, narrated her surroundings into a digital recorder, a modern version of the equipment her father had once used. "I stand here in the heart of a living legend," she intoned softly, her words blending with the eerie hush that enveloped the clearing. "Every stone, every tree, and every breath of wind here speaks of a history that refuses to die, of a darkness that even the light of day cannot erase." Her voice carried across the void, reaching into a darkness that seemed to pulse and shimmer with an otherworldly energy. Then, from behind an ancient oak, came a sound. A slow, deliberate scrape against bark, as if something was trying to claw its way free from centuries of confinement. The noise grew steadily louder, punctuated by an almost human groan, and Eleanor's skin prickled with a dread so profound it was nearly paralyzing. At that precise moment, an old radio, one that had belonged to Arthur and which Eleanor had painstakingly restored, began to emit a series of fragmented transmissions. The words were muddled, overlapping with the natural chorus of the forest. "They are coming, do not," and then a long pause, followed by a chilling growl that morphed into something almost resembling a plea. In the static that followed, Eleanor thought she could swear she heard her father's voice, tired and tremulous, as if from another time. "Keep your eyes open. Trust nothing in the dark." The voice receded into the background, leaving only a haunting echo that reverberated across the clearing. In that unbearable silence, the very air seemed to thicken with anticipation. Eleanor's heart pounded as she followed the sound, her eyes darting between the dense fog and the shadowed outlines of trees. A figure slowly emerged, half obscured by the swirling mist, a creature at once familiar and horribly alien. It was impossibly tall, standing on two legs like the monstrous dogs of old, yet its body was disturbingly emaciated, as if time itself had stripped it down to a skeletal frame. Its eyes shone with a feral intelligence, and its mouth opened in what could only be described as a silent howl that resonated with the sorrow of forgotten centuries. The creature seemed to shift and waver at the edges, its form caught between solidity and the fleeting ephemeral essence of the mist. For a long, agonizing moment, Eleanor and the creature simply regarded one another across the gulf of time and terror. Then, as if in response to some unspoken command, the forest erupted with an unearthly cacophony. The darkness vibrated with the sound of dozens of voices, a discordant chorus of howls, groans, and whispered warnings that seemed to emanate from every shadow and crevice in the woods. In that staggering moment, the boundaries of the clearing began to melt, and Eleanor found herself adrift in a vision of overlapping realities. Memories of her father's gentle yet grave admonitions mingled with the horrifying present, her own voice merging with the spectral chorus of the past. Every instinct in her body screamed to flee, yet she stood transfixed, locked in a silent communion with a force that defied mortal understanding. Outside the clearing, the first responders were alerted by frantic radio calls. "Mayday, Mayday. Unidentified large entity on the old logging road. Repeat, it's here." But even as the emergency vehicles converged on the perimeter of the forest, the scene in the heart of the glade remained untouched by human intervention. In that final confrontation, as Eleanor's trembling hand hovered over the recorder, she realized that all the painstaking records, the whispered warnings, and the countless unanswered questions had led her to this singular, shattering instant. The creature, a living embodiment of the forest's ancient grief, its eyes brimming with an indescribable sorrow, stepped forward as though inviting her into a secret that had long been guarded. And then, with a sound that was part farewell and part plea, it spoke, a voice that reverberated through the clearing and deep into Eleanor's soul. "Why have you come?" The question hung in the air like a suspended breath, a challenge and an invitation all at once. In that charged silence, as the sirens wailed distantly and the whispers of the forest swelled into a crescendo of despair, Eleanor felt a profound realization descend upon her. The dark tapestry of events that had haunted her family for generations was not simply a chronicle of inexplicable encounters. It was an ongoing reckoning with a force that existed at the very boundaries of human comprehension. In that moment, caught between the past and an uncertain future, she understood that the mystery of the forest was far from resolved. Its secrets, its ancient grief, and its relentless hunger would continue to echo into eternity, waiting for the next soul brave or desperate enough to heed the call. The night was unusually still as we set off toward the woods bordering Maplewood's quiet suburban streets. I remember the cool October air mixing with the faint aroma of fallen leaves and distant diesel exhaust from the city. My heart thumped with excitement and apprehension as I, along with my two closest friends, Liam and Frank, stepped off the cracked sidewalk and toward the gnarled forest entrance. The dark canopy loomed above us as if it were watching our every move. Our flashlights barely cut through the night, their beams dancing across ancient trunks and scattered undergrowth that whispered secrets of forgotten days. We'd all grown up with the legends that parents muttered in hushed warnings, old myths of spirits and curses that kept children from wandering too far. Yet the thrill of the unknown had always pulled us beyond those borders. That night, emboldened by a reckless desire to prove ourselves, we made a pact to venture farther than ever before. Liam, who was a year older and always the self-assured leader of our trio, set the pace with confident strides, though his bravado belied the tremor in his voice when danger lurked too near. Frank, whose cautious nature often served as the counterbalance to our impulsiveness, hesitated at every shadow and rustle. I tried to steady my own nerves by keeping a mental list of all the times we had run back, breathless but safe, after our short escapades. But as the moon wavered behind thick clouds and the forest's darkness grew deeper, a sense of foreboding began to settle over us like the damp chill of the autumn air. We reached a landmark, a weathered, rusted sign reading 9th of April, 2012, etched into stone near a narrow footpath. It was our informal measure of distance, a marker of previous adventures that we had set out to exceed. The inscription was worn, its letters chiseled by time, and somehow its presence both comforted and unnerved us. Proud of our progress, we pressed onward until we encountered something that defied the regular contours of the forest. Amid a cluster of towering pines and oddly smooth rocks, an anomaly presented itself, an old bunker, half swallowed by creeping ivy and moss. Its concrete walls were pitted with decay, yet there was a steadfastness in the way it stared back at us, a silent, sinister challenge. Without hesitating, Liam's eyes sparkled with a daring gleam as he clambered toward the entrance. "Let's see what's inside," he said, his voice echoing off the silent facade of the bunker. Frank's protest was immediate but feeble, his words tripping over one another as he pleaded, I don't know. It doesn't look safe. Those stairs might just collapse." Yet, the magnetic pull of the unknown overcame our trepidation. We followed Liam's lead, stepping into the dim aperture where the stale air carried an odor of mildew and old regret. The bunker's dark interior swallowed our flashlight's beams whole, except for a narrow tunnel that revealed a winding spiral staircase carved into cold metal. Each step we took echoed in a rhythm that matched the cadence of our pounding hearts, blending with the distant, unplaceable hum of the wind outside. The staircase descended into an oppressive darkness that seemed to stretch indefinitely downward. Every metallic clang deepened our sense of isolation. The further we descended, the more oppressive the air became, cloaked in an unsettling warmth that contrasted sharply with the biting chill above. "How deep does this go?" I whispered, echoing my own uncertainty. Liam, ever the bold one, grinned as he produced Frank's flashlight and dropped it into the abyss. Its feeble light sputtered and then vanished into the depths, leaving us to marvel at its futile glow before it faded altogether. The silence that followed was broken only by the rush of our nervous breaths and the soft creaks of the old structure settling around us. Reaching the bottom of the stairs, we found ourselves in a cavernous room, whose stained concrete floors were veiled in layers of age-old mold and fungus. In the center lay a solitary broken flashlight, a grim token of our descent. Dominating the far wall was a massive, rusted metal door locked shut by time and neglect, its presence a stark reminder of the bunker's original purpose. Liam's eyes shone with the thrill of discovery as he inspected a peculiar metal panel embedded in the wall. With trembling hands fueled by a mixture of excitement and defiance, he pried it open to reveal a lever. "I'm going to pull it," he declared, his voice echoing as he gripped the lever firmly. With a resounding clunk, the locked door slid open with agonizing slowness, revealing a narrow corridor lined with cells reminiscent of an abandoned prison. The walls bore dates etched in heavy glacial strokes: 7th of July, 1954, 9th of August, 1954, 13th of September, 1954. Their ghostly records were silent testimonies of lost time. As we hesitated in the threshold, the corridor beckoned like a dark artery. Dust motes danced in the narrow shafts of stray light as we stepped into the maze-like passage. The cells, though barren at first glance, exuded an aura of melancholic tragedy. It wasn't long before we reached the final cell, a tiny room at the corridor's end where something lay forgotten in the far corner. There, in a twisted tableau of decay, were 3 emaciated figures sprawled on the cold floor. Their skin, a pallid remnant stretched over almost skeletal frames, bore the marks of decades trapped within these confines. The dates on their cells suggested that they had been here for over 50 years, yet the absence of decay defied the natural order, lending the scene an otherworldly chill. Are they dead?" I stuttered, barely able to form the words. The silence that ensued was shattered by a soft, almost imperceptible twitch. My heart lurched in my chest as one of the figures jerked its head, as if stirred by the mere sound of our voices. In that terrible instant, the dormant terror of the corridor exploded into an unyielding nightmare. Limbs twisted unnaturally. Sinewy arms detached from their confines and fell from the ceiling, as if pulled by unseen strings. These creatures, half-formed and grotesque, advanced with a jerky, horrifying gait, their movements erratic and unnervingly precise. Their eyes, sewn shut with coarse, threadbare stitches, hid secrets too monstrous for human understanding. "Run!" Frank's shout cut through the mayhem, and our instinct for survival propelled us into frantic action. We scrambled backward, our flashlights flickering madly as we barreled toward the metal staircase that beckoned us back to a semblance of safety. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs as each step upward was fought for with every ounce of strength. Behind us, the creatures shrieked in an unearthly chorus that mingled with the grating sound of their drag across the concrete floor. In the chaos, amid desperate tussles and the cacophony of terror, I glanced back to see Liam caught in their spindly grasp, his panicked cries blending with the monstrous cacophony. "Don't leave me," he had screamed, a plea that was tragically swallowed by the dark. I barely registered the horror unfolding behind me as I pressed on blindly upward. I ascended faster than the stairs seemed to allow, each metallic step echoing in the cold corridors of my memory. Frank was right behind me, his panicked footsteps quickly fading as the abyss below claimed him with a sudden gut-wrenching terror. I had reached a critical point when a searing scream, a sound filled with raw pain and despair, ripped the fragile barrier of hope I had clutched onto. The echo of Frank's agony resounded for a painfully long moment before the oppressive darkness closed in around me. I forced my legs to carry me upward, away from a horror that defied description, until the reassuring glow of the streetlights washed over me as I burst out of the forest's edge. I collapsed on the cold, familiar pavement outside my home, mind reeling and body trembling with shock. The night's horrors etched permanently into my memory. Hours later, after a fitful sleep riddled with nightmares, I awoke to find my world irrevocably changed. In the sterile light of dawn, I recounted every tremulous detail to my parents, a narrative met with disbelief and hurt skepticism, until news spread in our quiet town of missing children and the mysterious disappearance of those who had dared trespass into the night. The local police arrived promptly, their radios crackling with terse instructions as they began a methodical search through the wooded outskirts and the decaying bunker. Officers in rugged uniforms, faces hardened by years of service, probed every dark corner with measured caution. At the Maplewood Police Precinct, Detective Harold Mason meticulously reviewed the case files with an unwavering gaze. The report on file listed the incident as an unverified abduction, a hasty verdict wrapped in community rumors, and the surreal nature of the account. Mason's team interrogated witnesses, retraced our steps with thoroughness, and even collected samples from the bunker's mold-slick floors for forensic analysis, a process that would later baffle even the most seasoned experts. Through persistent radio dispatches, Officer Ramirez communicated live updates from the scene. Unit 17, perimeter secured. No immediate signs of forced entry or struggle. Over. The clinical tone of the police broadcast contrasted starkly with the emotional intensity of the unfolding nightmare. The evidence at the scene was scant. A broken flashlight here, faint traces of unfamiliar, viscous fluids there, but nothing that could conclusively affirm or deny our claims. In the fog of uncertainty, the mystery only deepened. The investigation dragged on through long, cold nights. Maplewood's community halls and coffee shops buzzed with whispered conversations about what really transpired on that fateful October evening. Local news broadcasts featured grainy reconstructions and interviews with distraught family members, while online forums thrummed with speculative theories ranging from supernatural curses to secret government experiments. Among the turmoil, Detective Mason spent countless hours re-interviewing me, trying to extract details that could bridge the gap between fantasy and reality. I recounted our desperate flight from the bunker and the ghastly figures that seemed to defy nature. Mason listened silently, his pen scratching furiously on a notepad. "You're sure of what you saw?" he would ask in a measured tone, his eyes reflecting a skepticism that belied an underlying fear of his own. I could only shake my head, my voice a fragile whisper as I replied, "I know what I saw. I can't forget it." Days turned into weeks, and the police's search of the bunker yielded no trace of the creatures or of the missing boys. The metal staircase, once a gateway to our dark descent, now stood as an ominous relic behind heavy police tape. Forensic reports came in conflicting, with experts debating the possibility of unexplainable preservative phenomena or deliberate staging. Recorded radio transmissions from that night were replayed over and over in the precinct, a loop of terse officer updates and static-laden pleas for backup. The investigation reached an impasse as forensic evidence and eyewitness testimony drifted on the edge of believability, a twilight zone where nightmares blurred with reality. The case was eventually archived under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind more questions than answers. In the following months, the town of Maplewood experienced a disturbing pattern. Isolated reports of missing children surfaced like unwelcome echoes from the abyss, each one accompanied by inexplicable details reminiscent of our ordeal. Muffled screams heard late at night in suburban backyards, fleeting glimpses of gaunt, twisted figures in the peripheral vision of passing drivers, and faint radio static picked up by local ham operators, cryptically referencing dates from decades past. The city's emergency services were inundated with calls that defied conventional logic, and rumors of a hidden network of bunkers and secret experiments began to proliferate among the community. A particularly chilling moment occurred on a rainy December evening, when a frantic call came into the 911 center from a distraught parent. "Please, my daughter is missing. I saw something moving by the old bunker, and then the radio started crackling like it was alive." The voice trembled, fading into a background of eerie static. The call was traced back to a quiet cul-de-sac near the forest's edge, a location now shrouded in dread and unspoken legends. As I sat in the cramped living room of my childhood home, speaking softly over the phone to a detective who politely urged me to contact a psychiatrist, I couldn't shake the chilling certainty that the horror had not been confined to that fateful night. Every creak in the floorboards and every flicker of the television became a sinister reminder of what lurked just beyond the veil of ordinary life. The police files remained locked away in dusty archives at the Maplewood precinct, inaccessible to most, yet the truth had already seeped into the very fabric of our existence. My sleepless nights were haunted by vivid nightmares in which the creatures with sewn-shut eyes crawled out of the darkness, whispering a cryptic message about debts owed from generations long past, and a sinister force that fed on fear. Even as the search for the missing children came to a standstill, more disturbing incidents unfolded. A local journalist, determined to unearth the truth behind the unresolved case, recorded a series of clandestine interviews with retired police officers and locals who remembered the eerie silence that followed that October night. It was like the forest swallowed the screams, leaving nothing but questions, one of them recalled over a grainy cell phone camera. Another hinted at a covert operation orchestrated by unknown parties, implying that the stories of the malformed figures were part of an elaborate cover-up. The more I heard these accounts, the more I became convinced that Maplewood was sitting atop secrets that were never meant to be unearthed, a macabre tapestry of lost souls and hidden experiments stretching back to the Cold War. In my restless hours, I pored over every scrap of information I could find, searching for clues that might reconnect me with Frank's laughter or reveal the final moments of Liam's desperate cries. The evidence was thin, but every detail, from the genuine police transcripts to the first-hand recollections of distressed witnesses, painted a picture so incongruent with ordinary life that it could not be dismissed as mere delusion. Then there was the disturbing incident on an overcast morning in early February, when a group of local teenagers, emboldened by urban legends and the promise of viral internet fame, attempted to revisit the bunker. Their plan was to document the alleged hauntings and secret passages rumored to lie beneath the forest. Their amateur recordings captured fleeting images of rusted metal corridors and inexplicable shadows dancing on cracked walls. A brief but unnerving police radio broadcast interjected their video, a terse, disembodied voice warning, "This is Unit 12. Do not engage. Backup en route." The footage cut off abruptly, leaving viewers with a lingering sense of dread and unanswered questions. The police claimed that the teenagers had inadvertently disturbed evidence of a long-forgotten facility used for clandestine operations, yet the narrative never added up. The local authorities were careful with their words, refusing to confirm or deny any connection to our original ordeal, and the case was quietly relegated to the annals of Maplewood's unsolved mysteries. I often revisit these memories in the solitude of midnight, recalling every whispered conversation, every desperate cry, and every echo from that dismal bunker. The terror of that night continues to pulse through my veins like a forbidden secret, its darkness undimmed by time or the reassuring lights of civilization. As the years passed, I learned that some horrors never vanish. They merely slumber in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to awaken and remind us that the boundary between nightmares and reality is far thinner than we care to believe. And even now, the mystery lingers like a half-remembered dream. Was the bunker simply an abandoned relic of a bygone war, or had it been a front for something far more sinister, an experiment in confinement and terror that transcended time? The unsettling question remains, gnawing at my sanity and echoing in the silence of every creaking floorboard. Late one windy night, months after the official investigation had stalled, I sat in my dimly lit room, the only sound the unsteady hum of a faulty streetlight outside and the distant murmur of police radios at the precinct. A news bulletin flashed across the screen. Yet another disappearance near the outskirts of Maplewood. The reporter's voice, steady yet tinged with an uncharacteristic tremor, stated, Authorities are baffled by a recent incident that eerily mirrors the unsolved case from 2012. Eyewitnesses describe a figure seen near a long-abandoned facility, and rumors of deformed creatures abound. Residents are urged to stay indoors until further notice. In that moment, as I listened to the news, the familiar chill of dread coiled around my heart. I couldn't help but wonder if the events of that long-ago October night had been merely the beginning of something far more sinister. A legacy of horror that continued to claim lives under the guise of urban legend. I reached for my phone, the screen lighting up with old messages and desperate unanswered calls. In one final trembling voice memo that I'd recorded on that fateful night, Liam's laughter, and then a long, echoing cry still reverberated in my memory. "Help us," he had whispered through the static, a plea that resonated with a haunting finality. I paused, the weight of those words heavy in the silence, as the radio in the background crackled with a message I had long forgotten. "All units, be advised. Unknown activity confirmed in Sector 7. Proceed with extreme caution." I left that message unheeded, a relic of a night when boundaries between life and death, reality and nightmare, blurred into a single, unsolvable mystery.